Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Montgomery County Council. Our colleagues will be, more of our colleagues will be joining us momentarily. Actually, there's Mr. Katz. We will begin, as we often do, with an invocation from the Reverend Rebecca Montgomery this morning, Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Rockville. Welcome. Please rise if you are able.
Good morning, brothers and sisters, my kin. I invite you to join with me in the spirit of prayer. Gracious God, source of peace, we seek your wisdom and guidance here in this place. May we be reminded of our highest aspirations in all our endeavors today. May we serve the people, keeping the greatest good in the forefront of our hearts and our minds. May we listen deeply with compassion and vision. May we speak the truth with courage and kindness in our walk. Beloved of our hearts, source of peace, may your presence be here today. For all of these prayers, spoken and unspoken, in your holy name we pray. Amen.
We will now have a proclamation recognizing Bob Malloy, retired high school football coach, by Councilmember Katz. And Councilmember Navarro will be joining him.
You know, as many of us know, there are certain people in everybody's lives that saves their life for them. And, of course, a coach does that in many, many ways. So do many educators, so do many other people in our lives. But Coach Bob Malloy, who we're about to give a proclamation to, and I was just teasing him, there's more information in here, maybe in this proclamation, maybe than he wants it to be, but we're going to do that regardless. But Councilmember Navarro and I are going to read that proclamation. But Coach Malloy is the number one winningest coach in all of the state of Maryland, in the history of the state of Maryland. And, of course, when we sent out the news release from the county, I also had it mentioned that my good friend, Mayor Family's good friend, John Harville, who was certainly a good friend of Coach Malloy, who actually was a rival, and then at one time they actually coached together, was the second winningest coach in Montgomery County. So today is really a very, very special day for many, many people. But with that, did you want to say a few words, and then we'll read this proclamation?
Absolutely. I mean, this is such a glorious day for us to really have this opportunity. And as it was mentioned, you know, coaches really do change lives. And we here in Montgomery County have this tradition that we always do everything, you know, the best. We're always number one. So it is wonderful to have this opportunity to honor someone who has given so much and changed so many lives in such an excellent fashion. So we're very proud and really very honored to have you here today, along with your wife, to present this extraordinary recognition.
I'll be the first one, you do the next three. This is a proclamation from the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland. Whereas Vikings represent leaders determined to discover new worlds. Devils are innovative and filled with fire. Warriors are fearless, and falcons fly higher and faster than most. And whereas in 47 years of coaching high school football in Montgomery County, Bob Malloy has well represented all of those traits as he led the Vikings of Whitman in Bethesda, the Blue Devils of Springbrook in White Oak, the Warriors of Sherwood in Sandy Spring, and the Falcons of Good Counsel in Olney. And
whereas in that time, Coach Malloy guided his team to 405 victories, 124 losses, and one pesky tie, making him the winningest coach in Maryland high school history and placing him number 16 nationally in and all-time victories for high school coaches. And whereas those victories led to 8 Maryland titles, tying for the most won by a coach in the state, with his Springbrook teams winning 6 and his Sherwood teams winning 2, and then at Good Counsel, his Falcons won Washington Catholic Athletic Conference championships from 2009 through 2012.
You did hear that. He won the championships from 2009 through 2012 there. Whereas throughout his 5 decades as a coach and teacher, he was just as admired for his efforts in front of the classroom as many of his players went on to play in college and the NFL. And many of his non-athlete students highly achieved on their way to college diplomas and other successes in life. And whereas we can try to describe the respect Coach Malloy earned, but it's easier to just say he has been named to the DC Sports Hall of Fame, the Maryland High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame, and the National High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame. And whereas the word legendary should never be used lightly, but we confidently say that upon his retirement, Bob Malloy shall forever be introduced as the legendary Bob Malloy for all that he has accomplished on and off the football field. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby congratulates legendary Coach Bob Malloy for setting marks that will stand as goals to match for the future coaches of high school football in our county, and for doing it all in a first-class championship way. It's signed today by our council president, Roger Berliner.
Wow. First of all, legendary just means old. That's all it means. I'd like to get my daughter, Kelly. Get up here.
We'll get somebody to take pictures, please.
Well, first of all, I write big, so there's really not that many notes here. But I want to thank the Montgomery County Council and council members, Katz and Navarro, for having me here. Also want to thank Neil Greenberger, who was probably behind the whole thing. But anyway, I was born and raised in Montgomery County. I've been here 73 years. I coached 47 years at 4 different high schools, as you've already heard. And I want to say, in 47 years, I never made a tackle, I never caught a pass, and I never scored a touchdown. In order to do what we've accomplished over those years, it takes a lot of great help. And I have to remember some of those people and recognize some of those folks right now. Number one, thousands of great players. I mean, we had some good players. Great players make great coaches, let me tell you that. But and 2 of them are actually here today, Lauren Danielson and Phil Kaplan, back in 74 and 72. But thousands of great players, 9 of which got to the NFL. We have 5 in the NFL right now. Second, dozens of great coaches, loyal, hardworking, dedicated men. And I have to mention some. And, of course, when you mention things, a lot of times, you leave somebody out, and I certainly hope I don't do that. But I've got to mention Don Rushing. We've been together since 1970. John Haberman, Tommy Kroll, Billy Goodman, Kirk Davis, Tom McMahon, Bob Salento, Jimmy Castonway, Kevin McFadden, and Steve Gent. And some of those guys were there at all 4 stops, Whitman, Springbrook, Sherwood, and Good Counsel. Thirdly, you have to have great administrators, guys that want to win and support you. And that's probably the most important thing. And I want to mention some of those. First of all, my very first boss, Dr. Darrell Shaw, who is a Blair guy, who is the principal of Whitman. Eddie Clemens, a Blair guy, who is the vice principal of Whitman in charge of sports. Morgan Wooten, he was my athletic director at DeMatha. Most people have heard of him. And by the way, he did graduate from Blair. He did graduate from Blair. Dr. Tom Marshall, Springbrook High School. He was the best. He was great. Joe Bierman, the athletic director at Springbrook. Jack Graham, principal of Magruder for many years. Then he came over to Good Counsel. Art Ramo, the president of Good Counsel, and, of course, Pat Bates. Number 4, thousands of parents. We had so many wonderful, wonderful parents. I'd be insane to try to mention 2 or 3 because you're going to forget somebody. But, I mean, I never forget we had a playoff game. Friendly was at our place at Springbrook, and the game was over. They had the game, and somehow we got a fumble and threw a pass with no time left. Went for 2, won the game. Half the people had left. I'll never forget, though, Mr. Wolfram, who had 3 boys that played quarterback for me, he just said, everybody's coming to my house. This was a semifinal game back in the 80s. And that man must have cooked 6,000 cheeseburgers that night. I don't know how he afforded it, but I'll never forget it. Last but not least, my family, Susan, my wife of 41 years, I guess, 42. And I had the real pleasure of coaching all 3 of my children. My oldest boy, Brendan, played for me at Sherwood. We won a state championship in '86. And my second boy, Robbie, played also on the same line. And then I ended up coaching my daughter, Kelly, in lacrosse at Sherwood High School. So you got to have those 5 ingredients to get it done. Honestly, you do, which is, any coach would be certainly, has to understand that. The parents, the players, the coaches, the administrators, and a good family. You got to have all that. And so, that's I'm good. I'm fine. Somebody a long time ago told me, he says, you got to find out something that you love to do, and then somehow find a way to get paid for it. And I did that. I did that. It's the best job ever. Thank you very much.
We're going to get a picture, but of the players who were here, if you could come down, please, and be in this picture as well.
Next up, we'll have a proclamation recognizing Historical Preservation Month by Councilmember Reamer.
Great. If I could ask all of our leaders from the historic preservation community to come join me behind, in front of the dais. Everyone? Charlotte, that includes you. Terrific. Well, today's proclamation is in recognition of this being Historic Preservation Month. And Historic Preservation Month is a campaign led by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it's called This Place Matters. And so today we are here to recognize many people, not all of course, but many who are active in our community. The concept of This Place Matters is an important one, but I just want to say it's not only because there are beautiful buildings or other kinds of objects that we value that carry meaning. It's because these buildings, these communities tell a story of people who struggle and fight and live the values of our community. And when we preserve buildings and we preserve communities, we are preserving, hopefully, the story of our people. And that's really what historic preservation is about. It's about knowing who we are and where, hopefully, we're going as a result. So Those are my views on this. But today I wanted to particularly ask Anita Neal Powell to tell the story about her work. Anita is one of the first historic preservationists who I got to know in Montgomery County, and she, immediately shared with me the story of her work in Lincoln Park. And I still think about what I've learned from her regularly because it's such an important story in our county. And Anita's doing work day in and day out, and I thought it'd be great for everyone to just hear about the work of one of our community leaders in her efforts to preserve the story of her community.
Good morning, President Berliner and council members. Thank you, Vice President Reamer, for recognizing May as Preservation Month in Montgomery County, Maryland. This year, the Lincoln Park Historical Foundation is celebrating 40 years of preserving and recognizing African American stories as part of the American and County's history and historic preservation. African American stories are told by tracking our footprints through Roosevelt School's one room, churches, cemeteries, communities, museums, libraries, preservation conferences, road trips, and walking tours, publication, and Montgomery County African American Historical Map, and other places that matters, where we live, work, play, and/or go to school, and even on the Underground Railroad. The African American stories are not only for those whose stories are being told, but to those who believe in their county's history. We applaud you and the County Council for recognizing Montgomery County, Maryland as a place that matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you for your ongoing work. And before I read the proclamation, I just want to ask Mr. Crutchfield to come or Mrs. Crutchfield to come, Charlotte Crutchfield, come share your thoughts.
Good morning. My name is Charlotte Crutchfield, and I just want to tell you a little bit about my family. My family is the Crutchfield family, and we have owned approximately 2 acres of property in the heart of Rockville for over 150 years continuously. We are a part of a historically African-American neighborhood community called Hayti, and we are the descendants of the slaves of the Bill Dawson Plantation. We have continued to be a strong proponent of preservation of our community. And the leader of that has been my uncle, Warren Crutchfield, who has worked tirelessly with Rockville Peerless to do that. And so we would like to invite you, because simply our community is approximately about 1.5 miles away, to come out and actually view our community, which is made up of residential properties as well as a family cemetery. So again, we'd like to invite you to come out. We do have historic designated property there, and welcome you to come out and just take a look at what we have there. Thank you.
Okay, now before I read the proclamation, I just want to make note of all those who joined us today. However, my list of names and identities, okay, great. Before I embarrass myself, which I usually do. First of all, thank you, Scott Whipple, for your efforts to reach out through the preservation community today and help me organize this. Scott's with the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission. Casey Anderson is here. Mr. Anderson's chairman of the Park and Planning Commission and has an important role to play in this discussion. Tony Cohen with the Minari Foundation in the Ag Reserve, a farm that showcases the history of agricultural communities and the African American experience. Nancy Picard with Peerless Rockville. Nancy, thank you very much for your ongoing work. Anita Neal Powell with the Lincoln Park Historical Foundation. Bill Kerwin, he's chairman of the county's Historic Preservation Commission. Appreciate your work on that. I know it's a lot of effort. Sandy Heiler. Sandy is also with the commission, and as you may know, lives in the home where James Madison stayed as he was fleeing the sacking of Washington, D.C. So it's one of the alternate White Houses, one of the only other alternate White Houses in Montgomery County, I think. Emily Corral, is it Corral? With the Rockville Historic District Commission. Thank you, Emily, for being here. Julie O'Malley with the Kensington Historical Society. There you are, Julie. And Charlotte Crutchfield and Mr. Warren Crutchfield. And Judy Christensen with Montgomery Preservation, Inc. Thank you for your work. So, whereas May is designated Preservation Month by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and celebrated throughout our nation. And Whereas Preservation Month 2017 is dedicated to remembering that this place matters, that historic sites and cultural landmarks take on special meaning to individuals and communities alike, and that this is a time to shine a spotlight on Montgomery County's many special places. And whereas This Place Matters is a national campaign that encourages communities to celebrate their special places with visits, stories, photography, and an ongoing dialogue about the importance of place in our lives that lasts far beyond the month of May. Whereas the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission, supported by the excellent staff of the Planning Historic Preservation Office, oversees preservation of more than 2,400 historic buildings and landmarks and more than 430 historic sites and 24 historic districts in the county. Whereas in 2016, the Historic Preservation Commission approved tax credits for 98 projects, representing more than $2.8 million of investment in historic properties. Whereas the municipalities of Rockville, Laytonsville, and Gaithersburg support their own historic district commissions that together oversee preservation of 12 districts and more than 55 individual sites. Whereas Montgomery County citizens and public officials benefit from an exceptional network of history, preservation, and advocacy organizations whose members dedicate time and resources to promote county landmarks for the appreciation of residents and visitors alike. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Montgomery County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, proclaims the month of May 2017 to be Historic Preservation Month and recognizes that thanks to the monumental efforts of many organizations, local government and community partners, and residents of our county who work selflessly to protect our shared past and to enrich our future, truly, This Place Matters, presented on this 16th day of May and signed by Roger Berliner, Council President. Thank you very much for your ongoing work, and I'm going to leave this proclamation with Mr. Whipple, and I will be glad to prepare an additional one for any organization that would like one, and we'll share those with you following today's event. So thank you very much for your efforts. We really appreciate it. I forgot. Time for a photo, yes. Oh, right.
Madam Clerk, I believe it's your turn.
We have a number of additions this morning. On the consent calendar, we're adding an item I, action. It's an amendment to the Deputy Sheriff Management salary schedule that we approved on April 25th to reflect a corrected salary range. Another bill for introduction in the legislative session, Expedited Bill 1717, Landlord-Tenant Relations, Duties of Director, Licensing of Rental Housing Fees. Public hearing on that will be on June 13th. In the district, we're adding a district council session to introduce zoning text amendment 1702, overlay zone for regional shopping center. And then at the end of the morning, we're adding a closed session to discuss the planning board appointment. That's it. Thank you.
With those modest changes, we will now turn to Mr. Leventhal. Mr. Leventhal seeks to approve the minutes, and Mr. Rice agrees that we should approve the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Takes us to item 2, the consent calendar. I need a motion. Ms. Florine moves it, and Ms. Navarro has a second. don't see any lights on with respect to this item. All in favor of the consent calendar that is before us, please raise your hand. And that too is unanimous. That takes us to legislative session day number 16. Introduction of bills, expedited bill 16-17, swimming pools, lifeguards, amendments. Public hearing scheduled for the 6/20/17 at 1:30. The lead sponsor is Councilmember Katz, co-sponsors Councilmembers Florine, Elrich, and Berliner. Mr. Katz, what's this about?
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, I'm looking forward to the discussion on this legislation. It puts Air County's hospitality industry on the level playing field as their surrounding jurisdictions when it comes to having a swimming pool, which obviously is an important and an attractive amenity. Every other Maryland jurisdiction other than Baltimore County that has now introduced legislation, actually, I don't know whether they've actually voted on it yet, but they had introduced legislation before this one was introduced, and the District of Columbia all allow it to be done the way that this legislation is being suggested. At this moment, our local hotels are drastically limiting their pool hours or closing the pools altogether because of the cost of running them, and this legislation strikes a better balance. So I thank the co-sponsors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. B, expedited bill 1717, landlord-tenant relations, duties of director, licensing of rental housing fees. Lead sponsors, myself and Mr. Elrich. Colleagues, you will recall our conversation yesterday that I thought was a very productive conversation. We've got a memo from Ms. McMillan last night that all of you received with respect to how we will proceed, which is simply adding $210,000 to DHCA's budget and assuming the proper resolution language that identifies the tasks that would be done with respect to this. And this, of course, would be paid for by a modest increase in fees. Seeing no other lights on, that takes us to call of bills for final reading. Bill 9-17, fuel energy tax exemptions amendments. The GO and T&E committee recommends enactment with amendments. I will turn to the GO committee chair.
This is the fuel energy tax exemptions and amendment sponsored by lead sponsor Leventhal and co-sponsored by Councilmember President Berliner, Elrich, Hucker, Katz, Rice, Reamer, and Navarro. Was introduced on April 4th, and a public hearing was held on April 25th. And we did have a joint Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee and T&E work session on this as well. And basically, this particular bill would exempt energy generated by a community solar energy generating system that is generated from a renewable source located in the same electric service territory as the subscriber using the energy and subject to a virtual net energy metering agreement as defined by state law within a public utility. Currently, the law already exempts energy produced from a renewable source in the county, and it's either used on the site where it's generated or subject to a net energy metering agreement as defined by state law with public utility. However, this exemption only applies to renewable sources located on the customer's property or contiguous to it. This bill would expand the current exemption to include renewable sources produced by a community solar facility and sold to a county customer under virtual, quote, net energy metering agreement. The two amendments, there were two particular amendments that we adopted that were actually recommended by PEPCO, and this was to limit the exemption for a generating facility located in located in the state and delay the effective date to July 1st, 2018 to allow PEPCO to set up billing system. This effective date does not affect the FY18 budget. Anything else, Mr. Drummer? I think that's pretty much everything we did.
That's it.
Okay, so with that, I have this as a GO-T&E committee recommendation 5-0 to enact the bill as amended. Thank you.
Mr. Leventhal, this was your brainchild.
I just want to thank the Government Operations and T&E committees for their work on this, and I'm actually glad that this is coming up on the same day as the resolution which will follow, because I think it is incumbent on all of us to find ways to reduce our carbon footprint. I'm glad that this legislation encourages consumers to choose solar. This will benefit consumers who are not able to install solar on their own property but are able to purchase solar through a community solar arrangement, and it will make that more efficient and more cost-effective. So we've sought in a number of ways here in Montgomery County, both through county government purchases of electricity, which now come 100% from renewables, and also to encourage the private consumers to choose renewable for their own energy. I will say I think legislation of this nature is real and substantive and useful and will actually result in a true reduction in greenhouse gases. So I'm glad we're passing it.
Mr. Rice?
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank Councilmember Leventhal, the members of the GO and T&E committees also. And I really want to highlight something that I think is extremely important that the chair touched on when she was talking about providing access for a lot of people who don't necessarily have the choice to be able to put solar on their particular residential units. You know, it's something in which I think that our world is certainly becoming more aware of the decisions that they need to make to promote global sustainability. And it really is something in which I know in Annapolis we've done a lot of work. Councilmember Hucker and I have been really focused on trying to promote solar via tax credits, wind, and other renewable energy sources. But the reality is that a lot of times it's not possible for individuals to utilize this. And so being able to either purchase and get the credits by purchasing clean energy, but also for our HOAs. And that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight as well, because when you look at a place like Montgomery Village that can now actually create a solar farm in Montgomery Village and have people purchase their power from that solar farm in Montgomery Village, when you have a lot of large HOAs like we do in the Up County that can actually use some of their common areas and put solar panels there and have people purchase and get solar power from those areas. It's not just about creating solar farms in our ag reserve that I also promote, but it is about bringing it home. And so that really is what this bill truly does. And so I think this is a game changer for us. I really think that we've just scratched the surface in terms of the potential impacts it's going to have on our community. And I'm very excited to be supporting this bill and want to thank the sponsor for his great work. Thank you.
Mr. Hucker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also, everything's been said, I think, but I just want to also thank the sponsor for this. Pardon me? But I'll chime in anyway, because I have a microphone. For his leadership on this, I used to sponsor in Annapolis for a year the bill that allowed community solar, which was previously not allowed in Maryland. And we moved the ball forward a little bit, but once the bill got a better sponsor in 2015, it passed. I just want to reinforce the idea that there's a big market for this. There's, you know, in some estimates, up to over 50% of the public is not lucky enough to have a roof like I have with solar panels on it because they either don't own their own home or they don't have, they have too much tree cover or something else. There's a big application for this for our residential constituents, and there's a big application and benefit, I think, for both owners of multifamily properties, owners of storage facilities, churches, all kinds of folks. So there's a big market for this that's untapped, and I'm really glad we're taking this step today. So thank you.
I believe this is a roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Elrich?
Yes.
Mr. Elrich votes yes. Mr. Hucker? Yes. Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Ms. Florine?
Yes.
Ms. Florine votes yes. Mr. Leventhal? Yes. Mr. Leventhal votes yes. Ms. Navarro? Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Yes. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Berliner?
Yes. Measure passes 9-0. That takes us to item 5, action on resolution concerning environmental, social, and governance investment policy. I apologize. Did I miss? Thank you. I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. I don't need to do that. 4.1, introduction, zoning text amendment 1702, overlay zone regional shopping center. The lead sponsor is the council president at the request of the planning board. Public hearing is scheduled for 6/20/17 at 7:30 p.m. That takes us to item 5, action on resolution concerning environmental, social, and governance investment policy guidelines and fossil fuel company investments of the Employees Retirement System and Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust. I have served as the lead sponsor with Mr. Elrich, Ms. Navarro previously on a legislative effort to address this issue. It would have been, but for California, the only legislative approach to addressing this issue. Every place else that has done this work has done so in the context of resolution. I confess, I was frankly surprised at the extent of the pushback we got with respect to this effort, particularly after we made it so clear that the fiduciary duty of our investment trust advisors and managers comes first, that they cannot sacrifice the returns in behalf of this objective, notwithstanding how worthy this objective is. I've been the proud sponsor of over 24 environmental measures. I take second seat to no one on this council or any place else in terms of my own commitment to the environment, substantive, real action. I do not consider this matter to be a frivolous, merely symbolic matter. I consider this to be a serious statement of what our council believes is appropriate public policy without costing our retirees anything. The notion that we are profiting from the very fossil fuel companies that are endangering our planet seems to me to be simply unacceptable on any level. Unless, of course, there are not investments that could achieve similar results. And we know that simply is not the case, that there are many opportunities for commensurate returns without profiting from the very businesses that really pose such an existential threat to our planet. So I worked that bill with my colleagues as hard as I've worked anything on my 10 plus years on this council. Can't tell you, I don't even remember, Mr. Hamlin may, how many amendments that we drafted with respect to that, or Mr. Drummer. 10? Did we get to 10? I think we got to plus 10, maybe 11. 11 versus
Probably more.
11 different approaches, all of which trying to make it clear we are not going to cost our retirees a penny. In the end of the day, we simply could not get there. And many of my colleagues said to us, make this a resolution. The Board of Trustees said, make this a resolution. The President of the Board of Trustees wrote a letter saying, make this a resolution like the District of Columbia. We can get on board. Given that every other community that has advanced this has done so in the form of a resolution, including the District of Columbia, I felt that that was acceptable. And so that is why we are where we are today with this matter before us, one that I continue to believe protects our retirees and asks our managers, really? You can't substitute coal stocks? Apple isn't doing better than coal stocks? You can't find other stocks that actually do better? Even counter-cyclical stocks? I don't believe it. I actually directed my own financial advisor to make sure that all my mutual funds are sustainable mutual funds. And he said, we can do that and you will not suffer as a result. Institutions across the country are doing precisely that and finding that they too earn comparable results. So I hope that we too will see that result when we move in that direction, as I hope we will today. Let me turn to Mr. Leventhal.
As I read through this resolution the first time, paragraph 8, which I'd like to call to my colleagues' attention, sort of jumped off the page. I didn't understand why it was necessary. We received a great deal of correspondence on this, including an April 16th letter from Gino Wren, I don't understand the necessity of quoting the letter from Gino Wren. This seemed to me like a fairly simple edit. I brought it to the sponsor's attention, and I guess he believes this language is sort of like the Holy Quran. It can't be amended. But that's not my view. I just simply, every writer needs an editor. I just don't understand what it adds. I've spoken with Mr. Wren this morning. He doesn't see any need for it. He doesn't understand why it's in there. I noticed that Jeff Buttle's in the audience. He heads another one of our employee unions. He's written us a letter. His letter isn't quoted. We have many employee organizations and many other interest groups. We have 350.org represented here. They've written us. We're not quoting them. It just seems odd and out of place, and I move to delete paragraph 8.
It's been moved and it's been seconded. Is there a discussion? Mr. Elridge, would you care to speak to this point or different point? Okay, Mr. Hucker, would you care to speak to this point?
Sure. I had my light on for the resolution as a whole, but I mean, just personally, since you're asking, I don't have a problem with that amendment. I think or that paragraph. I think obviously, Mr. Wren, while he's on the board, he is weighing in his capacity, as the president of the union. So anyway, I didn't write the resolution, but I certainly don't personally have any problem with it being there. So I think it only helps. Thanks.
I will say to my colleagues with respect to this that the communication from Mr. Wren was one of the communications that made it possible for me to believe that a resolution actually was a viable path forward. And Mr. Leventhal came to me and asked me if I would consider taking that out. I believe that it should stay in because it was one of the key communications that made it possible for myself and my colleagues to move to a resolution given the role that Mr. Wren plays.
If I may.
I totally respect my colleagues' right to offer amendments. I wanted to keep this language in there. I will vote against the amendment, and I appreciate Councilmember Leventhal's desire to strike it. Is there any more discussion with respect to the amendment? Okay. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. That is Mr. Rice, Ms. Florine, Mr. Katz, Mr. Leventhal. All opposed? Ms. Navarro, Mr. Reamer, myself, Mr. Hucker, Mr. Elrich. The amendment fails. Mr. Katz has an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Under action for number 2, it says it said under action for number 2, it says report biannually to the council and to the executive on implementation of these actions. I believe that it should be, and the exact language I don't have, but I believe it should be in the very beginning that it is within it's within the 6 months. But after that, I believe it should be an annual report.
It's been moved, it's been seconded. I thought that this was I will respond as the lead sponsor, and I also have an amendment in the second degree with respect to this that I've shared with Mr. Katz previously. Right. Because I did think that there was some legitimacy to the argument of, geez, how much work are we going to ask these people to do? And so the amendment that I have that I will share with my colleagues, that I had shared with Mr. Katz previously, seeks to find the middle ground on this conversation by basically saying, yes, Mr. Katz, we will have an annual report that is full in scope, but every 6 months we will get a tracking report, simply a tracking report that says, here are the stocks that we hold in that top 200 fossil fuel companies, period. So it really minimizes the administrative burden with respect to this item, and yet keeps us focused on the progress that's being made. So I will offer that as an amendment in the second degree. Is there a second with respect to that? Mr. Hucker seconds it. Okay. Is there more discussion with respect to this item?
So then is the distinction, it's the other contents of the reporting are the same. It's just the difference of an annual versus yeah, okay.
So the annual would be a full report, and then
Right.
every 6 months you just get a tracking.
That's fine.
Okay. I hope that satisfies the sponsor of the amendment. Mr. Alvarez, did you, go ahead.
Look, I just hope that people don't feel obligated to rewrite entire reports every year. I mean, it seems to me that if, once they've established certain criteria and principles, it suffices to say that using what we did last, in the last report is sufficient. I don't know what a detailing the research conducted on top fossil fuel holding companies means. I assume once you do research on the top fossil fuel holding companies the first time, it's done. And so, I mean, I hope we're not thinking that we're going to require people to rewrite on a regular basis. I think that this thing needs to be balanced so that there's not a ton of work laid on people.
Mr. Hucker, you had your light on. Did you already, to this point?
I was going to speak to the resolution, but just on that point, I think no one wants to impose undue burdens on our fund managers, but the whole reason we are here debating a resolution and not a bill is because we really can't make them do anything. So, I mean, I'm quite sure that if this is so burdensome to update last year's report, which will be digitized, and I think as easy to update as our own ethics report are, since it will preserve last year's data. I got to imagine it's not too hard. But in any case, this is just a resolution, so I wouldn't spend too much time on how much we can require them to do, since we can't really require them to do anything. Thank you.
And I just wanted to comment on that. I'm actually in agreement with that. I don't know what a tracking report is really going to be doing for any of this. I think that we need, if you're going to get a report, that it should be on an annual basis where they say this is what we've done and this is what we haven't. But on the very first one, in the very beginning, it should be is that they can, because that's going to be the most work in the very beginning. So that's why I believe that it really, and of course, as we all know, annually comes around pretty fast. Anybody that does budgets knows how fast it comes around. So thanks.
Is there any more discussion with respect to the amendment? Okay, I just didn't know if you were speaking to the bill.
There's an order.
All right, so I have Mr. Hucker's light on. Mr. Hucker, do you care to speak to this? All right. I have, now the people have cleared their lights. I have Mr. Leventhal's light on.
So this last-minute piece of paper from the presiding officer is sort of in keeping with the whole manner in which the presiding officer has informed council members of his intention here. Unlike the resolution, this now delegates something called the Carbon Underground 200, which, unless I'm mistaken, does not appear in the resolution, does it? Is the Carbon Underground 200 referred to in the resolution? It's referred to as something the DC Retirement Board did, but do we direct our Board of Investment Trustees in the resolution to adhere to a list of investments from an interest group, from a political entity? I believe we do not, but Mr. Berliner's amendment would. So Mr. Berliner now requires that the Board of Investment Trustees will report to us on a list of investment options developed not by, I mean, I don't even know who it's developed. I have a vague idea of what it is. The council president didn't discuss this with me, so we're getting it at the last minute. The Board of Investment Trustees isn't here. I assume because the council president's in a big hurry to get this passed that we don't have time to really explain what the Carbon Underground 200 is, how it's derived, what's contained in it, what it involves, what it doesn't involve, and we're being asked to vote on this here having just now seen it. So I am opposed to this, and I just don't think it's respectful of other council members who are asked to make serious decisions about our retirees' pension funds on a basis that I don't understand. I have a vague idea of what the Carbon Underground 200 is. It seems to me that if we're going to get reports every 6 months on such a structure, it might have been useful to have council members have a little time to understand better how that's derived and what it is, but I know the council president is in a big hurry on this matter. I'm opposed to this amendment.
Mr. Elbridge.
This is an odd discussion over a resolution that's been made about as powerless as possibly it can be. Nobody is required to do anything, and no one is required to divest. And I'll frankly say that, I thought the most compelling argument that folks from our workforce made is that essentially their pensions are another side of their salary. And that if this had been county money and a county holding, I would look at this differently, much as we've made decisions on buying clean energy and all these other things, because those are council decisions made for county residents. And, you yourself have no problem proposing that we do that, and I'm sure you're motivated by things that we would all agree are the generally right thing, and I don't think anybody disagrees that getting out of fossil fuels is generally the right thing. But I was kind of caught up in listening to this over the discussion that the employees had about this essentially being another aspect of their paycheck, and that I don't tell them how to spend the current dollars they get from us. And what they asked us not to do is tell us how to spend the other part of their paycheck, which is the money that goes into their pensions. That does come out of their gross earnings. So I respect that. I think that that's probably the best reason for this becoming a resolution. But having said that, because it's a resolution, I honestly don't feel anybody is, not a matter of feeling, I know nobody is compelled to do anything. And I know a lot of the unions have actually looked at these issues separate from the pension fund and have reached conclusions that are pretty similar to the conclusions that most of us feel, which is it would be good if we weren't doing these things. So I'm willing to let this thing play out and give them the independence to make these decisions, not under a mandate from the council, but under an understanding that we all live on this planet and occupy this space together, and that they are thinking about things the same way we are in large measure. So I guess I just don't see even the late wordsmithing of this. I mean, I just don't see it as a fundamental burden on anyone, and it certainly doesn't pose a requirement and it's certainly not going to interfere with the ability of the pension fund to operate. I mean, I could say, I'm okay with almost anything at this point, because almost anything being proposed doesn't matter.
Mr. Reber.
Thank you. Well, this has been a challenging issue for the council, no question. I do believe that the Board of Trustees should not actively manage accounts that have fossil fuels in them. I don't believe that it's appropriate or fair to sacrifice returns to our pension participants in order to achieve that social goal. How are we going to reconcile these two challenges? It's going to take the active engagement of the board to work this through, and it's going to take some time to figure it out. And I don't know what more we can do than state our desire that this should be the case. I think fiduciary law prevents us from actually, requiring any changes, but we can state our desire that this should be the case, and we can receive regular reporting about the extent to which the board is able to achieve the council's vision. But the council's vision is a vision. It is it's a goal, but it's not something we are allowed by law to require the board to do. And I think this resolution recognizes that. And yet it says this is what we want. So I'm not concerned about the Carbon Underground 200. I think that that's acceptable. I don't know what else you would use. Otherwise, you would have a requirement of just some companies, and then we would have to argue about what that means in the future. So this is an acceptable framework to receive information about those companies.
So let me just clarify with respect to the state of the law and fiduciary duty. Obviously, environmental, social, and governance screens are, in fact, explicitly recognized by the federal government as appropriate, and those screens actually were used by the District of Columbia when the District of Columbia passed similar resolution to eliminate all of its holdings in the top 200 fossil fuel companies. So it is, in fact, using that screen that is explicitly recognized by federal law that can, in fact, achieve this purpose, and it is my hope that it will do so. Mr. Rice, did you care to? Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry.
So I just had a question. And again, this isn't a legal requirement. I mean, this is saying request. But if the Carbon Underground 200, which we're naming, all of a sudden changes its name, then, you know, so locking in something that has a name there is just concerning in the sense that even if we did want to adhere to what the list was, I mean, would mean that then they wouldn't have a list to refer to if they all of a sudden changed it to the, you know, progressive climate change 200 or something. I mean, seriously, I'm not, I mean, I'm just being real because we are, you know, trying to craft language that makes the most sense. So I would say that the top 200 fossil fuel companies, if we're going to go in this direction, at least make it a little bit easier and don't restrict to where we have some kind of name moniker that's in there that might not exist 2-3 years from now, and it might be something else. So at least eliminate that piece of it to allow flexibility. Mr. Drummer, does that make sense from your legislative drafting perspective in terms of the naming of Carbon Underground 200, understanding that Carbon Underground 200 might not exist 2 or 3 years from now and might be renamed something else?
Parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Leventhal.
As I understand the state of play at this moment, Mr. Katz offered an amendment to make the reporting in the first 6 months and then annually after that. The council president amended Mr. Katz's motion. So further amendments, I believe, are not now in order. Is that correct, Mr. Drummer?
Yeah, that's correct. You need to
Dispose of this amendment.
well, rule or make a decision on the motion.
Yes, there was a second. But did Mr. Katz agree to the? No, he didn't agree. So this is that we are going to have a vote on my attempt at a compromise. Okay. So I believe that's the state of play. Are there any more that care to speak to the amendment before us?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Ms. Florine first, then Mr. Leventhal.
So I know who Mr. Wren is. So I can understand in a political document that you're going to allude to the head of the county union there. But what is the Carbon Underground 200? Nobody's explained that. Now, we don't have any background material on this. No, you know, it's just, perhaps that's a group. I'm just looking at my phone about it, and there are some various allusions to it. But, you know, we're telling someone, the Board of, we're making a political statement to the Board of Investment Trustees, which I would personally encourage them to ignore, to adhere to some set of standards by some group about which we know nothing. Is that what we're being asked to do by this motion? I mean, I guess the council president knows something about it, but we don't. We haven't had a meeting on this. There hasn't been a briefing. There's no background material that I'm aware of. Perhaps I missed a meeting, but we certainly haven't taken that up in committee. That would have been a place where we could have that conversation, but we haven't. So I'm not sure what standard we're asking in this political document is asking the Board of Trustees to adhere to. That's my question. Is there an answer?
So the answer is that the Carbon Underground 200 is the most respected organization.
Well, that's what you say. Bless you, but what's the resource for this all?
So what I would offer to you, and you don't have to accept it, this has been in the resolution reference on page 7, on page 2 of the resolution. In item number 7, notably, the District of Columbia Retirement Board has sold all of its directly held Carbon Underground 200 stocks via ESG screening. So understand that other organizations, other municipalities have used the Carbon Underground 200 as the index that identifies those companies that hold the most reserves of fossil fuels. That is what they do. It is the definitive list used by many, many municipalities. So it didn't feel as though it was a radical step
Well,
here.
I would say I do join Councilmember Leventhal in saying, you know, we're asked to do things and expect people or pretend to expect people to respond based on information that's not before us. You know, I'd like to think that we're a little bit more thoughtful than this.
Mr. Leventhal.
The council president said a number of things that are just not correct. He said that federal law anticipates a Carbon Underground 200. It does not. ESG is a widely agreed upon, very broad effort to ensure ethical investments. It does not solely focus on fossil fuels. So this question about what is the Carbon Underground 200, we could all do a Google search and find out. It's developed by environmental activists. Bill McKibben is widely respected. I admire him. That's what it is. I don't think it belongs here, and the resolution does not direct the Board of Investment Trustees to adhere to Mr. McKibben's list, but now it will, because the council president at the last minute has required every 6 months a report based on Bill McKibben's list. And that is a last-minute decision that we're not really focused on. We're not getting any feedback from the Board of Investment Trustees on it. You know, the role of the presiding officer is to reflect the wishes of the body and to consult with members of the body, and I do hope that in the future presiding officers will resume that role. It's not happening this year.
Mr. Reamer.
Can we review the bidding here? Just restate where we are in this legislative process, if you
Yes, basically, we have an amendment before us. Mr. Katz offered an amendment to reduce the reporting requirements to annual. I've offered a compromise to that, which was intended to have an annual reporting requirement with a 6-month tracking mechanism. And so that's what is before us now.
And can I ask, was there, again, I asked this before, there isn't a difference in what you proposed other than 6-month tracking? The Carbon 200 was already in the resolution, although now the report specifies.
Read the action in the proposed resolution.
This is the first mention.
Well, but number 7.
Mentions that what the District of Columbia did. It does not direct our Board of Investment Trustees to
Could we
adhere
have
to.
order, please?
So now the tracking report would be tuned to the district, to the Carbon Underground
That's
200.
correct. Yes.
So it provides additional clarity
Clarity
about
to
what the
what we're looking at.
report expectation is.
That's correct. Okay. Mr. Elrich, your light's on.
Yeah. There are obviously multiple groups that track this. I don't know why we need to be specific. Just, you know, that however the board is going to report, they should, you know, give us a, they should adopt a reference point. And if it's the Carbon 200, they adopt that. If there's another reference point they feel using, they should adopt that. All they need is a reference point. And I don't think we should get hung up on whether it's the Carbon 200, which I think it's regretful they call themselves the Carbon Underground, because that immediately triggers the sense this is some suspicious, weird group doing something, you know, sinister, when really all they do is measure the fossil fuel reserves. Yeah, the carbon underground, and this has turned into something which apparently has sinister overtones. But I would be happy just to say an annual report, and that the board should adopt some kind of index that they feel comfortable using as a reference point.
Do you have specific?
If we're look at the end, I know, but I just want to say, look, at the end of the day, if we're not happy with what happens, we can have discussions with the board about it. But I think that we're all going forward on the good faith that the board said they were interested in doing it in this format, as a resolution rather than a bill. So let's leave them the leeway to see where they go with it, and then if we have to have more discussions, we have more discussions. If we're going to get overly specific now, I think it's going to hang everything up. So I would just like an annual report, and I assume the board will come up with some kind of reference point. And if you want to put that in, the reference point in there, fine.
So I'm trying to understand the
Yeah.
import of Mr. Elrich's suggestion. So we have an amendment that was put before you, and Mr. Rice's suggestion. We could strike the language as identified by the Carbon Underground and simply say exposure to the top 200 fossil fuel companies, however they identify those, and not have a specific reference. Is that the recommendation of Mr. Elrich? If so, I will,
An annual.
and drop the biannual, drop every 6 months.
Yes. Would Mr. Katz consider that a friendly amendment to your proposal?
If you'll explain it one more time, you're saying annual, and the tracking reports were there.
They just have to adopt some kind of, they will adopt some, you can't track something unless you adopt, but you can't track something unless you adopt something you're measuring it against. So they're intelligent people. They'll know that sort of what our expectation is. And I'm willing to work on faith at this point, that we're all trying to get to a similar comfortable place.
Council President's amendment is still pending, though. It needs to be addressed one way or another. It
Right.
can be withdrawn.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with George. I think we should either withdraw the underlying amendment.
No, the amendment.
You're the underlying.
Or the Berliner amendment, and then come back and let's discuss my amendment.
Sounds like a plan. I will withdraw my amendment.
All right, so the way it would read for the amendment, which I don't have the wording for it to start with, but the way it would read now for the amendment that I have proposed is that within the first 6 months, that there would be a report, and then it would be an annual report thereafter. That's where I was.
Would it be an annual report? The only word that I was hoping that you would include with respect to that language is an annual report with respect to the top 200 fossil fuel companies.
200. Why not 150? Why not 300? Why?
And my only concern with the 200 idea, candidly, is that if you, and everybody's Googling it up here as we're sitting here for the underground, Carbon Underground 200, is that changes quarterly anyhow. They send out a quarterly report on that. So you could have a corporation that was in there this quarter and was out of there next quarter.
225.
Right. It could be whatever number. So that's my concern. We all understand what we're asking our fiduciary group to be looking into. They understand it. We understand it. Why we're attempting to tie their hands in any other way than what we're asking, to me, is not fair to them.
Gotcha. So my amendment has been withdrawn. Your amendment is on the table. Is there further discussion with respect to Mr. Katz's amendment? Seeing none, that amendment is accepted. Okay. There you go. Further commentary with respect to the matter now before us. Mr. Elrich, your light is on. People flip off their lights if they're done here. Ms. Navarro.
So we're in the middle of May, and the primary is in June of next year? It's going to be fun. I just, no, seriously, I hope that my colleagues would remember that civility is always important as we try to work through what we're working through, because it's going to get unbearable. I truly do want to thank everybody who has looked into this issue. I think that as has been stated, these are not sometimes easy compromises, even though it shouldn't be this complicated. There is no doubt that we went from, a bill now to a resolution, and we have done this in the past. And what we're doing here is simply stating at least this council's intent in where we hope our Board of Trustees of investment can take a look and be mindful. I think there's a lot of progress that can be made once this at least intention is expressed. So I do believe that this is a step forward, even if it's a half step forward. And I think that, the details that we have discussed, I think that makes a difference. It wasn't that heavy or that deep to get into all this kind of back and forth, in my opinion. But, I'm glad that we have reached this this point, and most certainly have a lot of respect for everybody who is a member of this board. But for the future, I mean, it is a interesting position. I mean, Mr. Farber, you're playing like you're wearing two hats here, and so there is no doubt that this has not been a seamless process, because sometimes you have those interesting variables. Nonetheless, I do appreciate everybody on both sides of the issue who have expressed their opinions in terms of where we should head in this direction. And with this new administration, it becomes even more important that we do whatever we can to put our intent out there. Thank you.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you very much, Council President. And let me just say that, I would have preferred a different direction for us to go in. And I've had this conversation with the advocates. I've had this conversation with a number of my colleagues. I really think that there is a tide turning in this world when it comes to the acceptance of climate change. And you look at what happened in Paris as a prime example of where people are. And just because you have a few people who are out there still denying, we have that on a number of fronts, and we don't let that stop us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. From my perspective, and I've seen this, and you can just refer to a number of articles in the Washington Times or Washington Post that talk about shareholders and their ability to vote within being shareholders for these particular companies, about forcing these companies to start considering making changes. And when I addressed this with some of the advocates, they said, yeah, well, we haven't gotten anywhere. We just haven't, gotten to where we need to be. Well, that's no reason to stop. We need to continue to push these companies to understand that they need to get more invested in terms of renewable energy and not rely on fossil fuels. And it is profitable. People will pay. People are choosing, just as we had the last bill, to pay for solar and wind and more renewable energy sources as their producers of energy. It's happening, and it will continue to happen. And so instead of just stepping away from the table and not having a vote, I feel as though it's always important to make sure that your point is heard and that you have a voice at the table. Shareholders voted to alter Exxon's board due to climate change not too long ago. That happened. And that happened because people were shareholders. If you're not a shareholder, you don't get to vote to make those kinds of changes. I believe that you can make change within, not from the outside. It's the reason why I ran for this seat, to make changes within, not from the outside. And so that's my belief. And so I understand and respect people who want to enact change in their own ways. But understand we're all committed to the same thing at the end of the day. And that is getting us to the point where we understand that fossil fuels are not something that we should continue to rely on, that we need to continue to push for more renewable energy sources to make sure that our world is a better place than we found it. And so with that, I'm going to support the resolution, but I'm also going to continue to push for us to continue to have a seat at the table. And that will be my conversation with our Board of Trustees, because I know that they will have the ability to still make those kinds of decisions. I think that's the right direction for us to go in. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Hucker?
Thank you, Mr. President. I too am glad we're having this discussion. I think we're all agreed that climate change is really the greatest long-term threat to our citizens and their quality of life. And while county governments can't solve or really even meaningfully address the issue of climate change by ourselves, our work that we do every day up here is really greatly affected. I mean, just from a health standpoint alone, something we spend an awful lot of time talking about. The American Lung Association estimates that 13,000 a day people die each year from coal pollution, and that there are also 12,000 emergency room visits and 20,000 heart attacks and 200,000 asthma attacks. That is a real cost to both a human cost and an economic cost to our taxpayers, and our jobs are just going to get more and more difficult as our climate becomes more inhospitable. So I think it's perfectly appropriate that we want to do everything we can within our limited authority to fight climate change. It's great that the D.C. government has given us a model and has gone first on this because they've shown the the ability to completely divest from fossil fuels just 2 years after they passed a resolution. I'm committed to working with them and learning with them after today so we can take the best practices that we find in D.C. right nearby and translate them into some meaningful action in Montgomery County. Mr. Leventhal's new tax break that we're passing today, is just one of many things this county has done to increase our adoption of renewable energy, including our cleaner buses and high-performance building standards, and this resolution is totally consistent with our longstanding policy. So, I also believe this won't be just a statement about climate change, but will also enhance the long-term viability of our pension fund. The state and the economy are changing. There's a lot more people working in our county and in the state installing solar now than harvesting oysters and harvesting crabs. So, and that's been the case for a long time. We should be investing in our growing renewable energy portfolio and industries, and today's bill does that, and the resolution does the same thing. So I want to just congratulate especially finally the advocates for initiating this conversation and working out all the details with us. I'm glad we got to this stage today to be able to pass the resolution, but I think we're going to take some real cooperative work with our board to make sure that the divestment actually happens as well. So thank you for all your advocacy.
Ms. Florine.
Thank you. Well, Montgomery County has been the leader in all of this for so long, and I think that fact can never be forgotten in this exchange. Well, this is better than it was. I'll say that for us. But as my colleagues have said, this has no teeth. It's not binding. Board of Investment Trustees, Mr. Bill doesn't have to do anything. I think we all encourage them, and we've already gotten the board's commitment to worry about this with us. And I think that's a good thing. It's an achievement. I don't know about my colleagues. I have solar panels on my house. But last week, we all voted for a budget that I think we're spending over $120 million just on fossil fuels alone, not to mention all the products from fossil fuels, like asphalt for resurfacing and all the things that we do to serve the community. So, it's not so black and white. And I really think that having a resolution in front of us that is just a political document is not the way we should operate. I regret that we're in this situation, and I'm not going to support it.
Mr. Elrich.
So I guess I don't think this is just a political document. I think it's a statement of an understanding of where we're trying to go to, and I think it reflects, as Tom said, a broader sentiment that the world is changing and there's a recognition for addressing these issues. I appreciate the work of all the advocates, and though they're not getting exactly what they wanted, I think we're taking a step in that direction, and I appreciate the work and the input from the Board of Trustees and other people who were affected, who I think brought a different perspective to this than what we had originally thought of when it was initially considered. And I know that even the advocates hadn't looked at it from the perspective of employees, but rather looked at it as, what do you do with county money? And I think they are two really fundamentally different questions at the end of the day. I find this discussion to have been really helpful. And I guess what I hope comes out of this, and I'd ask the chair of the T&E committee to follow up on this, is there's been a lot of discussion about timelines and measures that the county has said it wanted to achieve. And there's a lot of question about whether we've achieved them or how close we are to achieving them. So the least that ought to come out of this is we hold ourselves accountable for the things we said we were going to do. And that, in fact, we'd be willing to look at going farther. I mean, I've long felt that, for example, in our building codes, things that are environmentally important ought to be requirements, not options. You can't say it's that important and then say, well, it's an option for you. And, do you think it's worth your while? So I think we need to look at some of this stuff and say, are we doing what we told people we're going to do? And should we do more? We just had a discussion when our Department of Transportation came back and said we're going to swap out electric hybrid buses for diesel buses. And we were like, what? That's the opposite direction that we want to go in. So I think we need to be more aggressive and explore more of the things that we say are important to us. I think that we have opportunities in both what we've said we're going to do, and we have opportunities in things that we could do that we haven't said we were going to do. And we ought to be looking at that stuff. And it ought to be, I think, I would hope that those decisions aren't political, that, dealing with the environment should not be a political thing, at least not in Montgomery County. So we ought to look rationally at what our options are and what we can do, and we ought to get on about it. And I'm hoping for the best out of this. That I heard, I sat in the meeting with the Board of Investment Trustees, and I thought a lot of people shared the concern. What they took umbrage with was the requirement. And I think, so if we all share the concern, let's let people work together to getting where we all think we want to get to. And we'll have time to come back and look at things as how they progress. But I think this is an important step. I'm happy to support it, and I look forward to doing additional work.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. There are no further lights on. The matter is now before us. All in favor of the resolution as amended, please raise your hand. That's Mr. Elrich, Mr. Hucker, Mr. Rice, Mr. Leventhal, Ms. Navarro, Mr. Katz, Mr. Reamer, myself, all opposed? Ms. Florine. Measure passes 8-1. Let's turn back to our item before us, which is work session on the FY18 operating budget and FY17 to 22 CIP amendments, the NDA for community grants. Ms. Joan Schaefer.
Thank you very much. For the record, I'm Joan Schaefer, the Council Grants Manager. I know I'm, again, between you and lunch. This seems to be our annual meeting here, but I will be as brief as I can. But before I get to the brief part, I want to take a few minutes to say some thank yous. There's a lot this year. First, I want to thank the 48 members of this year's Grants Advisory Group, and in particular, I want to take a minute to single out 2 of our volunteers. They aren't here today, but they have promised me that they're at home watching on TV. Kim Ebb and Claire Engers have been steadfast members of the Grants Advisory Group for 9 years now. Claire, if I start with her, is an amazing woman who's made huge contributions. She is a lawyer, she's a trained therapist, and has brought great insights to the process. More importantly, Claire has been the one that has brought Kim Ebb to every one of her meetings for the last 9 years. Kim Ebb, for those of you who don't have the pleasure of knowing her, is 93 years young. She is just a remarkable woman. We all aspire to be Kim when we grow up. Not only has she made enormous contributions to this process, but Kim has had a pretty illustrious life before this. After graduating from Columbia Law School, remember, she's 93, she was the first woman to ever clerk for a federal appellate court judge. She went on to work as I believe, assistant deputy general counsel for the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. She was a senior official at the National Science Foundation. She worked on the Hill on all kinds of interesting matters. She's been a partner in a law firm. She's done it all, and we have been thrilled to have her as a member of the Grants Advisory Group. Kim and Claire are threatening after 9 years not to come back, but I'm hoping with this resounding appreciation of them, they will reconsider it. Okay. Kim, as you're watching this now, just know, Claire as well, we think the 2 of you are fabulous. This year, in addition to the Grants Advisory Group as a whole, we had 4 additional partners working with us. The council had approved this last fall, and they were the Montgomery County Food Council, the Interagency Commission on Homelessness, WorkSource Montgomery, and the Montgomery Cares Advisory Board. They worked very seamlessly with us. We had combined teams of grants group members and members of their organizations. They did a great job, and I'm really pleased to have had them. We've already had 2 debriefs on the topic of how things went with them. We're going to have 2 more, and we will look forward to, if we continue this process, improving it as we go forward. In total this year, just as our grants process has grown, we had a mere 79 volunteers. This is my little prop today. It took 2 pages of the Grants Advisory Group skinny report to list them all, but 79 volunteers that put in countless hours between January and April to review applications, to meet with and evaluate nearly 400 applications. I'm particularly indebted to this year's Grants Advisory Group Chair, Karen Judson, who actually, in her day job, is a grant maker and very steeped in grants and has been with us for several years. And Karen actually led one of our teams this year because we couldn't be in 3 places at once. I want to acknowledge the work of my council colleague, Karen Sargent, who works very closely with me to lead the various teams of grants group members, and she just does a bang-up job. In the background, we always have Sandra Marin and Marie Jean-Paul, who do much of the work behind the scenes, and I would be remiss every year if I didn't mention Linda McMillan, who is my conscience, my answer to all questions, my font of wisdom. And then, of course, I don't want to leave out Jed Millard, my colleague from the county executive side of the house from OMB, and Jed always makes it very easy for us to work together. So thank you, Jed. Finally, and as I am always aware, the Grants Advisory Group would be very angry with me if I didn't mention the 251 different organizations who submitted grants this year and the amazing work they do on behalf of our community. I know we've got a few of them in the audience today. Okay, enough of that. Moving on. The purpose of this work session is to request your approval for funding related to 2 community grants NDA, the one for the county executive and the one for the council, and finally to approve some language regarding outcome reporting that should go into the resolution. In January this year, the council accepted 345 applications that requested nearly $19.8 million. In March, the county executive recommended an additional 53 applications that had not been previously submitted to the council. That brought our total number of requests to 398, absolutely a record, and the total dollars requested to $21.8 million. If I can draw your attention to the box on page 3 of your staff memorandum, you'll see that we had modest increases in volume this year. The number of proposals went up by 6%. The organizations applying increased by 8%. Total dollars requested by 12%, not terribly insignificant, but if we look back to 2014, which is the year that I first joined the council staff, we can see that since that time, the number of proposals we've gotten has increased by a whopping 62%. The number of organizations submitting proposals by 55%, and the total dollars requested are up by 74%. Because of the volume and many other things, one of your colleagues, one of the council members asked OLO this year to do a report on the grants process. And I'm very much looking forward to that report being researched and written. I anticipate, I've been told that it should be ready by fall. And I'm looking very much forward to its recommendations so we can improve the process and that we can deal more effectively with the volume of applications we've been receiving. Okay, beginning on page 3 of the memorandum, down at the bottom, you'll see a more detailed description of the review process that we've been through. I'm not going to walk you through it in excruciating details, but it talks a good bit. Yes.
If I could ask you to pause for a moment.
Yes.
Mr. Elridge has a question.
So I know my question's hypothetical, but looking at the numbers just kind of made me think about this a little bit. I mean, we obviously get more grant requests than we fund. And a lot of people who come to us, the grant requests seem like life or death. Either, we're going to do this or we're not going to do it. And I would be curious to, and if we're doing any kind of follow-up, to see what the consequences are of groups not getting grants. I'm not saying that if there are consequences, there shouldn't be, but it would be good to understand, how do people adapt if they don't get a grant for us? Do they find other sources of funding? Do the programs they want to do simply not happen? Or do the organizations go away? I mean, I know we have limited ability to do things and would not suggest otherwise, but I think understanding how things ultimately play out for people would be useful.
Thank you. It is a reasonable question and something we can follow up on.
Mr. Varro, did you want to pose a question at this point?
Yeah, I do. I'm glad that OLO's looking at the process. I think that it would be useful, not only what Councilmember Elridge was bringing up, but we have had some conversations about this notion of migrating certain grantees into the base budget, given that year after year after year after year after year, we continue to fund at the same level. And if we believe that they're so important and necessary that we're doing that year after year, why not evaluate and see whether they should be migrated? So to the extent, again, I'm not familiar with the OLO scope of work on this particular project, but I think maybe it'd be worth seeing if they can do a quick, take a quick look at that and see what that might look like. I know that the HHS committee and GEO both, we are engaged in this ongoing conversation regarding this. I would also point out, and this might be for a next administration iteration or something like that, but I think it might be useful to also consider having one county grants process, right? So instead of bifurcating this thing where, we try to not make it so political and try to, bend over backwards to provide this extraordinary process, but it's not the same at the executive side, and so it's confusing both for organizations as well as for trying to, maintain a sort of policy goal continuum. And so I think that's another thing for us to consider. It's a time to really have one pot of money, one process, because I am so shocked. I mean, $19.8 million, it's extraordinary. And the needs are growing. I mean, we see it at every single presentation from the school system, from HHS. I mean, this is not just something that, the nonprofits are applying for just so that they can get going or some nice to have. And so, again, I think we need to get real about what this grant process means and what this program is all about. And if you're getting $19 million worth of requests, and then we're turning around and saying, okay, well, we're going to, $7 million of that. I mean, it just seems to me like we need to kind of grow up when it comes to this whole grant program and make it a lot more, I think, sustainable and much more coherent and aligned with our policy goals. I feel like this was great, 20 years ago or something, but in terms of where we are today, and if we really truly believe that nonprofit organizations are an integral part, then maybe it's time to reevaluate all that. So anyway, I just want to share that with my colleagues. It's things that I hope we can address, but maybe, again, the OLO scope of work in this particular arena maybe should be expanded a little bit to take a peek into some possibilities for these types of modifications to the process.
Thank you.
Back to you, Ms. Schaefer.
Okay. Actually, kind of underscoring that point, at the bottom of page 5, there's another table, and it shows you how much has been granted each year since 2010, FY 2010, which was the year that I first became involved as a member of the Grants Advisory Group. And at that point, the total council approval between the executive and the council was $4.3 million. As of last year, it was over $10 million. So we've had about 250% growth in those 9 years. It underscores Councilmember Navarro's point. And the other thing I think is there's a little bit of circular
Mr.
function.
Reamer has a question or comment.
Just to continue the dialogue, the point that's made, at the risk of setting myself on fire, what we could do is we could say there shall be no grants, and we could give that amount of money to a foundation like the community foundation, and then we could make an annual appropriation that would increase at the amount that we feel is affordable. I don't think anybody would like that, but that's an alternative that would, create the possibility of grants without us being so directly involved.
It is an option.
You have poured the gagasoline. Hopefully,
Yes.
no one will. Hopefully, no one will light the match for you.
It's an
we are
option,
your
not a
friends,
good
yes.
option. But
Ms. Schaefer.
Continuing on. Okay, I'm going to just skip on to the next point here. If we
Mr. Elrich
turn-
has a comment or question.
Yeah, Hans poured the gasoline. It's not my fault. Look, I'm too close to you. It would not be worth the risk. Look, I think you raise an important point, and I think we need this discussion. I know there's going to be an OLO report, but we need a conscious discussion about this because the nonprofits extend the role of government, and they do so much work that otherwise we would have to do. I'm not even sure I'm comfortable with handing it to one, mother of all nonprofits and hoping they make the right decisions, because if they don't fund, say, childcare or something that we prioritize, then we're going to be back in the same seat. I mean, I think we ought to look at what piles of money that we're expending and give some conscious thought to what the prioritization of those things ought to be, knowing there are going to be winners and losers. But if you only have X amount of dollars, we need to be picking what are the things that have the most impact. Since we can't fund everything, what are the things that change games? But I think I appreciated your comment. I didn't mean to suggest you had lit the place on fire. But I do think it's something that we need to be really, I think we have to go forward and try to sort this out differently.
Mr. Katz.
thank you. And though I do appreciate the comment, I don't believe that would solve the issue from what Hans was suggesting. I think at some point, if you move it to a different group, it just causes that different group to have a different problem, and they have different discussions. But my greatest concern on this, and there's a lot of good concerns, but my greatest concern is what we're doing to the nonprofits themselves. Each year, their budget time frames are around the same time frame as ours, and they can't count on any of this money unless it's in the base budget until we have these types of discussions. So here they are holding their breath saying, how are we going to do this? And to Mark's point, I mean, I think that we should have a discussion about how much of this really is the lifeblood for each organization and how much it matters. But the bottom line is they need to get information as quickly as possible. There probably should be multi-year grants. There's probably should be all of these types of discussions. These are our partners. To everybody else's point, these are our partners in the community who do a wonderful job. And we should be able to work with them in a better way than we are. Obviously, everybody applauds them and thanks them, and we go through the list. But we should be able to come up with these a system where they understand what monies they might be getting or will be getting, rather than having to wait to the very, very last day to do their own budgets. It's just not fair to them.
Mr. Leventhal.
I appreciate the conversation, and I know that we'll continue to look into it. And I see Bridget Howe in the audience, the executive director of Nonprofit Montgomery. One of the issues that we probably ought also to discuss, which also is politically controversial, is whether there is some way to encourage nonprofits to partner and potentially even merge. We are in the position of being asked to fund a lot of very sincere, well-meaning people's good ideas. And in the process, we do end up supporting a multiplicity of organizations, many of which serve common purposes. And it is worth looking. I've raised this issue over time, and there are always arguments not to do it, but it is worth having a community-wide conversation, which Nonprofit Montgomery is ideally suited for, as to whether so many different organizations need to pursue the same goals, or is there some way that like-minded organizations could come together and achieve greater efficiency in terms of overhead. So I'd also like to put that on the table. Not that the county government could mandate or would even try to mandate what private organizations do, but that private organizations themselves may find, just as in the for-profit sector, they find that sometimes mergers are in everybody's best interest. As I look through the list of grants, and I'm abundantly familiar with most of the organizations, not 100% of them, there are just some obvious commonalities and opportunities, it seems to me, to combine interests and even combine staff and combine structure. So that's another topic I'd like to put on the table for this ongoing conversation.
Mr. Rice.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, but I do have to chime in on this. Let me just start off by saying amen, sister, to Councilmember Navarro. I can't agree with you more in terms of what you've said. I mean, look, at the end of the day, here's the deal, and I want to just cut to the chase. And look, this is no disrespect to the county executive, but the county executive makes his decisions based on a very different rationale from the council. And so by having these separated and having the same grantees apply for both, it really is one of how much you can get in the face of the county executive versus then creating a grant that is going to be scrutinized by a committee. And it really is a very different process for the same sort of money at the end of the day. And so it's confusing to folks. You know, in one instance, it's making sure that you're in the face of Chuck Short. And, you know, saying, hey, you know, I want you to be aware of my organization and what it is that we do. And in the other, it's you have to make a solid grant proposal and have it that's in front of peers that are going to scrutinize this and scrutinize your books and do all those kinds of things. And I'm not saying the county executive doesn't do that, but I've also talked to folks who've gotten grants from the county executive that didn't get grants recommended from the Grants Advisory Council. And so I say to myself, how is that possible? If we're on the same page, if we're doing the same things in terms of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And so from that perspective, I do think that there has to be a revamping. Plus, we also had this conversation. I'll just remind my colleagues, we had talked about this and saying as a part of our moving into the base budget piece that we would really look at our grants process to be more in terms of innovation. If you're doing something new, if you're doing something that's trying to stamp out a problem that's in front of us now, that's what our grants process should be for. While the things that we do the day in and day out, when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to clothing and feeding folks who don't have those types of things, those are basics, right? And so those should be a part of our base. They're basics, right? And so from that perspective, getting that innovation to our grants to say, hey, you came up with something new to figure out a new way to address this problem. Let's use that grant process to help spearhead that and get you rolling, get you started, right? That's what we had talked about before, but it seems as though there's been no traction. It's my hope that whoever, and no, I'm not saying anything about 2018, but whoever is in 2018 is going to have to foster that. I mean, we need a vision when it comes to these kinds of things. And so it's my hope that somebody is going to actually make that sort of change, because I think that will take us to the next level, which is kind of what Councilmember Leventhal was saying as well.
Back to you, Ms. Schaefer.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. I look forward to more conversations on this, and I'm pretty confident we're going to be having them. Okay, if you'll turn to page 6, part 2 of your packet, the memo presents the county executive's grant recommendations. And in May, he recommended 221 discretionary community grants that totaled $7.8 million. But then he subsequently sent over a budget amendment adding 2 grants, bringing the total recommendation to $7,914,464. These grants are listed in your packet beginning on Circle 55. The Grants Advisory Group reviewed each of the recommended grants, and evaluations for each of them were included in the Grants Evaluation Group's report this year that was issued back on May 1. The executive also recommended 11 community service grants, and the recommended total funding for these 11 small capital grants of less than $10,000 is $60,716. While the grants group did not review those 11 community service grants, they did go through a competitive process in DHHS. The recommendations for the community service grants are listed on Circle 63 and 64 of your packet. And I'll just stop there and recommend that the council approve the $7,975, $180, I'm sorry, one more time, the $7,914, $464 for the 223, I can do that, county executive community grants.
I think it's $1 million.
$7,914,464, those big numbers, for the 223 county executive grants, and the $60,716 for the 11 community service grants as a group. It would total $7,975,180.
Mr. Leventhal, your light's on.
I serve on the board of Bethesda Green, and so I'd like to be recorded as recusing myself on the grant appropriation for that organization.
There's a staff recommendation before us. It's been moved by Ms. Florine. It's been seconded by Mr. Rice. Is there any objection to approving the matter before us as presented? Done.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we move on to part 3 of the memorandum, beginning on page 6, I'd like to take up the council grants, NDA, and staff recommendations for that. So each of the 345 applications we received were reviewed by the Grants Advisory Group and its partner organization. On average, I think at least 4 people read every single one of them. You'll find a complete listing of the council applications beginning on Circle 19 of your packets. Council staff conferred with members of the grants group and their partners to develop the list of the most highly recommended grants. This year it's 103 of them for council consideration, and that was based on the evaluation criteria that have been established by the council and the council's priority to fund grants related to safety net services for the neediest members of our community. This year, with the approval of the council, we also ask for organizations to work together and submit applications as teams. And while that recommendation was made late, we only had about 8 proposals that came in as teams, and I believe that half of those have been recommended for funding, and a 5th one was recommended by the county executive. The grants recommended not only provide basic needs services, but they also fund programs in many other areas, including health and behavioral health, positive youth development, services to the disabled, services to the elderly, services for children and family, programs for economic development, and for community development as well. As in past years, the grants group would want you to know that there were many, many applications that provide important services and effectively leverage county dollars. However, given the amount of funding that was available, we've limited the list to those on circles 65 to 70 of your packet, and it totals $2.66 million. Of note, the recommended grants range in size from the small end of $2,800 to $142,000 at the high end. The median recommendation was for $22,000. In 50 instances, just under half the grant recommended would augment funding recommended by the county executive. And when we consider the total funding for those 103 grants, excuse me, the county executive and the county council together, the median recommendation rises to just about $40,000. Only about 30 of the recommendations are for total funding. Those were some of the strongest and most compelling requests we got. The rest are for partial funding, and I will tell the council that over the years we've probably used more partial funding as the number of grant requests have gone up in an effort to be able to provide some funding for more organizations. There's probably some discussion about that, but that is the approach that's been taken. So staff would like to recommend that the council approve the $2,659,587 for the 103 recommended grants as a group. They will not need to be added to the reconciliation list as we have over $3.1 million in the community grants NDA.
Is there a motion? Moved by Mr. Katz, seconded by Ms. Florine. Is there discussion? Mr. Leventhal, your light is still on? Your light is not on. Without objection from my colleagues, I think we will approve this matter. Is that correct? Without objection.
Thank you. The last item for our discussion today is on page 8, and you will see recommended language, reporting language for the FY18 appropriations resolution. It requires twice yearly progress reports from each grantee, and the Grants Advisory Group has found these reports to be incredibly helpful when they look back to see what's been accomplished since the last grant year if applicants have been funded in the past. This language is very similar to what's been used in past years, just with dates changed. So if you are comfortable with it, I would like to ask you to adopt the recommended language.
Is there objection to the staff proposed language? Seeing none? Done.
And we are complete with grants unless you have any further comments.
I think we are good.
Thank you.
Ms. Schaefer, the only other comment is to thank you and your team. It is an extraordinary amount of work, and I think we all need to appreciate how hard so many volunteers, as well as Ms. Schaefer, spend on trying to get this process so that everybody has confidence in it. And it's a difficult process, given the stakes, for everyone to feel like they've been heard, particularly people from different cultures who struggle with trying to make sure that they're on the same page as the way in which we do our work. And so it is always something that we hear about. But I really have to say that I think Ms. Schaefer has taken that charge in particular very seriously and done everything possible to ensure that there are reviewers who are culturally sensitive and competent and to the maximum extent possible. I am sure there are improvements that we can make going forward, and I'm sure my colleagues will have no shortage of suggestions for how to do that. But I want to thank you for all the good work that you and those who have spent so much time on this. So
Thank you.
hats off to you.
Thank you.
With that, colleagues, I believe I need to...
Move that we go into closed session to discuss appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, motion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom it has jurisdiction pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3305A1I. Topic is planning board appointments.
It's been moved, it's been seconded. All in favor of going into closed session, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. We will meet in the room behind us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a couple of public hearings, not a lot of speakers, but a little more work to do yet this afternoon. I'm showing 5 votes on everything here on these items. We are good. We are so good. So we will take up agenda item number 8 first. This is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY17 capital budget and amendment to the FY17 to 22 CIP DOT for resurfacing residential rural roads. Action is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, May 18th. That's 2 days from now. Persons wishing to submit additional comments should do so by the close of business today so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee's consideration. For anyone scheduled to testify today, please bring copies of your written testimony to the clerk at this time. Do we have any speakers for this, Madam Clerk? We do. Do we have a speaker?
Somebody needs to clean that stuff up there. They put some flyers there.
Could you remove those pieces of paper in front of you, good sir? Thank you. 3
Good af-
minutes are yours, good sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Nelson from the Up County, Montgomery County's fastest growing area. The Up County roads that I travel are a patch quilt of potholes, and the pothole blitz is only another expensive Band-Aid dealing with extreme deterioration of our infrastructure. And it's been a hard winter, but rustic roads that are periodically recoated with chip seals have previously held up for many years. But the recoating has been deferred, the top membrane has been compromised, and crocodile cracking and potholes result. Drivers may need expensive repairs to their vehicles after bouncing over these gaping holes. Once the chips are gone, the roads are very slick and unsafe. I support increases in the budget for road maintenance, but I want to see lasting solutions, not the temporary cold patches. Another contributing factor to crumbling up-county roads is the increased traffic generated by new developments in Germantown and Clarksburg. Due to clogged arteries with bumper-to-bumper traffic, many vehicles, including heavy trucks, are now circumnavigating via country roads never designed to handle this traffic volume and loading. And what we need is to complete the up-county infrastructure promised for decades in the master plan. As you know, 4-lane Snowden Farm Parkway recently was extended southward to connect Clarksburg with already heavily congested State Route 27. And we need to accelerate the completion of Snowden Farm Parkway Extended, also known as the 6 Mile Gap and the Mid-County Highway on the master plan route. Now, with the dramatic growth of Clarksburg and Gaithersburg and the recently approved Montgomery Village master plan permitting 600 new homes to replace the Montgomery Village golf course, anything less than building the 4-lane M83 on the master plan route will not deal with the continued dense growth in the Up County. Generating a council resolution to the planning board is not the answer, as they already have gone on record in 2013 as supporting M83. I have an attachment. A current member of the planning board proposed an innovative funding idea that would use tolls collected on the Mid-County Highway segment from Shady Grove Road to the ICC to pay for the construction of the 6 Mile Gap. Every report that DOT has generated supports constructing the master plan route and notes that alternatives of BRT or Route 355 improvements will not sufficiently satisfy the up-county needs. The opposition has been alarming the public with false claims and cost estimates, and recently has been spreading a vicious accusation regarding one of your colleagues. It's time to cease the divisive rhetoric and do what has been promised for over a half-century. Let's stick with the plan and give the up-county its fair share. Build the Mid-County Highway now on the master plan route. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. I think that concludes this public hearing. We will now have item 9. This is a public hearing on County Executive's April 24, 2017 proposed amendments to the FY18 operating and capital budgets and FY17 to 22 capital improvements program, FY18 capital budget, and FY17 to 22 CIP amendments for Montgomery College, and an amendment to county government facility planning to add funding to study a new Bethesda CBD recreation center. Persons wishing to submit additional comments should do so by the close of business today so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee's consideration. Do we have a witness for this? No witnesses for this hearing. This matter is now closed. That takes us to agenda item number 10, where we have a public hearing and action, supplemental appropriation. This is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county the county government's FY17 operating budget and amendment to Resolution 18-506, Section G, FY17 designation of entities for non-competitive award status, $100,000 for WorkSource Montgomery non-departmental account. Action will be scheduled immediately following this hearing. Do we have any witnesses with respect to this matter? We do. Therefore, could somebody please come up and introduce themselves? Hit that button again, good sir, so that that red light goes on right below your mic. No, right, it's at the base of your mic there. You got it.
Got it. There we go. Thank you. Got to get used to that. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Will Jawando, East County resident, but also proud director of Summer Rise, which is all about connecting our kids to careers earlier on in the process so that we can keep them here and that they can have families, have a job, grow here, learn here, realize that there's interesting and fun and exciting and innovative career opportunities right here in Montgomery County so we can grow our tax base and do all the things that you all want to do, and I agree that we all want to do together. I want to read a quick quote from Ike Leggett, our esteemed county executive, which at the launch of Summer Rise, which I think encapsulates what we want. We need to be able to, and I quote, we need to be able to guarantee that a company doing business here in Montgomery County will find educated, talented, and dedicated people who will make their organizations compete and succeed at the highest levels. This brand new initiative, Summer Rise program, will help to do just that by providing seniors and juniors in our Montgomery County Public Schools with enriching summer career development experiences in our county's businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies. And that was, we had a launch at Kaiser Permanente a couple weeks ago, and Councilmember Rice was there. And so that's what this program's about. We're excited about it. That's why he included the supplemental request. We're off to a great start. I'm very excited to report, and that this is, and we have over 1,000 students that have applied for this program. I think demand will exceed our supply this year, but this is the first year, and this is a long-term program. We hope that you all will support and our businesses will support. We've had a lot of support from county businesses and nonprofits. We're excited that the placements are just as important as our pre-program, where we have professionalism training for our students that covers communication, conflict resolution, proper dress, email etiquette, and that's going to happen this summer starting in about a month when students get out of school. Then the placements will be July 10th through the 28th. This is so we can connect our kids to the green jobs, to cybersecurity, to all the innovative IT professional jobs, construction. We've got a wide variety, and we're still recruiting all the way up until the wire to give as many kids this opportunity as possible. We hope that this leads to apprenticeships and internships and jobs in the future, but we want to light that fire early in our 16, 17, and 18-year-olds so that they can see what their opportunities are. Last thing I'll say over time is that we're very happy to see that a lot of our kids that are from lower income parts of the county are a majority of the applicants, kids that would not otherwise have access to these types of employers like Clark and Eagle Bank and Kaiser Permanente, but for this program. And I think that's a very important component. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jawando. And I just wanted to inquire a little bit about, so Mr. President, I think that because there's action, do we want to just jump into a discussion about the actual proposal itself from the county executive regarding supplemental appropriation? Because I actually have a proposed amendment to the supplemental appropriations. Would you like to close the hearing first and then go into action? Would that be appropriate?
If you don't have any questions for this
No.
witness, I couldn't tell what the point was. Seeing no other questions for this witness, this hearing is now closed. Now, Mr. Rice, you got something you want to bring to our attention?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And let me first thank Mr. Jawando as well as Dr. Giles for their support. This is something that all of you at the dais have heard me continue to talk about regarding this great new program, Summer Rise, that is going to provide summer job opportunities to our students. The reality is that we've gotten a lot more response than we thought originally. We were thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 students. 1,000 students have applied. 1,000 students just simply times $300 stipend is $300,000. Certainly we appreciate where the county executive has gone in terms of setting aside the $100,000. The reality is that we need $250,000 to actually support this program. That $250,000 actually encapsulates an understanding that MCPS is providing $75,000. Summer Rise has actually gotten private sector support for an additional $50,000, and PEPCO, via its settlement regarding workforce development, is actually through WorkSource Montgomery, and thank you, Dr. Giles, is giving $90,000. And so, again, for something that's so worthwhile in terms of meeting the true call in terms of ensuring that we have a summer jobs program that can start off really getting to a lot of students, understanding that there'll be so many more that we need, I would actually ask that we change the recommendation from the county executive from the $100,000 to $250,000.
Yes, you may.
So it's been moved.
I was going to say, as long
It's been
as
moved, it's been seconded. I would ask staff to please advise us as to the consequences. Where are we drawing this money from?
The money would come from undesignated reserves, just as the executive's recommendation is. And to Councilmember Florian's question, as long as it's for the same purpose, the council may amend however they wish. So if you fund the 100,000 or the 250,000, as Councilmember Rice and Florian have moved, it would all come from undesignated reserves. For fiscal 17, which would mean that fiscal 18 reserves would start lower.
Got it. Mr. Reber?
Thank you. So I really like this program. I cheer Mr. Rice's enthusiasm here, and I appreciate the great work that's going into it. My question is about how many slots are, available for kids to take. I think that's what we need to fund towards, is how many slots have been identified rather than how many kids have applied, because we're not funding the applications, we're funding the internships themselves. So how many internships have been, lined up so far?
Right. So I think you provided some of this information, but I'll clear it up. We have in your packet that I put in front of you a realistic goal of 750 slots that if we started today, we wouldn't have that. We're closer to about 350, but we have commitments from a lot of people. And as you know, chasing down people and getting them to sign up and put them in the system and, twisting arms, and we're procrastinators by nature. So I think we will be closer to this 750 number, but I can't tell you exactly. We'll be over 350, but I think closer to 750. And so it's a kind of a floating number in that regard.
Okay, so my concern is that the funds that we give to you now are basically funds that are not available for reconciliation for our budget.
Right.
So we have to be really tight in what we fund. If anybody has a question about that, you can address that to council staff. You don't have to. But so I know you've got the number lined up from the county, from the college, from MCPS, and that's the bulk of the numbers. So you've got 120, is that correct, from businesses that have registered so far?
Correct, currently that are in the system, yes.
And you would want, so how many slots, what would be the dollars for what you've already got confirmed in the system so far?
Right. So I just want to state, and I'll answer that question, but so I have another 50 businesses that have said to me or Ellie or others that we're going to do it, but they just haven't gone into our system and created a login ID and entered the opportunity, right? But I have every confidence that, they will take those slots. So if you're asking for the number of what's in the system today versus what will be in the system by the time we start in July, which let me just be clear on what number you're asking for.
I need like a rock solid number of what's going to be in how many slots you really can create, because we don't have any dollars to spare.
Right.
Every dollar, so that's really the bottom line. Is like we can't overfund the slots, and so I'm asking you to not overpromise, at all. And I know you wouldn't do that, but that's the kind of underlying issue.
I think the bare minimum would be 400.
400 slots.
Yeah.
And what's the dollars associated with?
For the stipends, there's obviously other costs outside of the stipends.
Sure,
I understand
absolutely.
you're saying you just want to fund the stipends. I think there's a case to be made to fund the whole thing.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not.
The trainings and everything else, but because just the stipends would be 400 times the 300, so that'd be 120,000 just for the student stipends. That includes none of the work to create the program from scratch since January, or to do the student trainings that are going to happen, 20 of them concurrently around the county. We're also going to be training businesses.
And how's that funded?
A combination of us and MCPS. The business trainings will be totally us, where we're going to bring them together. And
when you say us, you're going to raise private dollars? Is that what you mean? Or
WorkSource Montgomery.
WorkSource Montgomery, and the 90,000 that you're using of the PEPCO funds.
Right, and we're still raising private sector money.
And you're raising private sector dollars.
As well.
Okay, so you've got the 90 from PEPCO dollars, you've got 50 from MCPS, so you got 140,000 for the program, and then the stipends dollars is You said it would.
So that if you're doing the 400, I mean, it depends on what number you're using, right? But if we stick with 400, that's 400 times 300, so 120,000
Right.
just for the stipends.
Okay, so that means the recommended amount of $100,000 is short by $20,000 for the stipend.
If we
for
get
the-
400.
For what you're lined up confidently right now.
I think we'll overperform that. but
And you may overperform that,
yeah.
so, but will you overperform by, you know, how many internships can you pay for out of $120,000? That's like,
It's
Well, that's
just
the
stipends,
400.
300.
what's that?
I'm sorry, 400, yeah.
That's the 400 number. And I think the other part of Councilmember Rice's memo was that the bridge funding, because I started in January, so in 4 months we built the whole program, created everything, did the curriculum, recruited businesses and others at the same time. Really, next year, because the word's out and we've done a great job getting the word out, and next year is going to be even bigger. And we're talking about a population, even if we just limit it to 24,000 juniors and seniors, that's the population. 24,000 applicants could apply. And so I think part of this was bridge funding for next year, because there is no currently an appropriation, and you need to recruit July 29th for next year. I mean, so we're going to need to keep going right away. So that's just part of it too. I understand that's not your question. I just want to just make you aware, when we're thinking about how this program is going to run, we really need to be recruiting as soon as it ends on July 28th.
Okay. I don't know if staff can clarify for us. I mean, you're making important points there about the organization and the ongoing. So I understand you have $140,000 to support the operations of the organization, and you're seeking stipend funding and potentially some additional
Programmatic
organizational
support,
funding.
yeah, correct.
And the math on the stipends, again, Gene, can you please walk us through the math on the stipends?
Well, sure, it's 300 times whatever number of slots they choose to have. So if 400's their kind of realistic, well, I wouldn't say realistic, my apologies, is their low-end goal, I mean, that's 120,000. If they are able to get to 750, that's roughly 225,000.
And we have a appropriation of $100,000 from the county executive. Mr. Rice was raising that to 250.
Correct. The executive's request is 100,000. Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Florine have moved to 250,000 total. And I'd note that, I mean, also with the bridge funding, perhaps another wrinkle to this is if council members are unsure, is to also see where it goes in the summer of 2017. And if there's bridge funding needed, we can also look at that in the fall of 2017 after a successful summer program. It's just one option available.
Okay.
Mr. Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hey, Will.
How are you doing?
It's good to see you here. This is I'm glad this is happening. There's a real need for this. For better or worse, I have a lot of experience with summer jobs programs, so I have, forgive me for having a few questions.
No problem.
How do you screen applicants?
Great question. So we don't screen.
They apply.
They apply, and we thought it was very important that it would be open to every student, no GPA requirement, no anything else. But they do have to demonstrate commitment. So they have to apply online, and part of that application online in our portal is an online professionalism skills curriculum. It takes about 30 minutes to go through, and then they have to take a quiz at the end, and they have to pass 9 out of 10. That's step one. Step two is they have to attend an in-person, about 2.5-hour training that we're working on with MCPS, which will be internship coordinators, where we'll cover all those professionalism things, reinforce them, that I mentioned, conflict resolution, proper dress, email etiquette. And they'll also learn about financial literacy. So they have to attend that in person and sign in when they get there. And only after you complete those 2 steps, and as well as have your parents sign the parent agreement, so it's really 3 steps, are you eligible to be matched and participate in the program. So as you can imagine, some high school students will apply and not do those things. And so they will it's not a screening, but there is a process that they have to demonstrate commitment.
And the program, how long does it last? I'm sure
3 weeks.
Just 3?
This summer, yeah.
After that initial application process. And the application process on your website is now closed.
It is. We had overwhelming student demand, we didn't want the delta between students that applied and opportunities to get too wide, especially in the first year.
And do you have attendance requirements for the 3 weeks?
Yes, they have to do 20 hours a week, and we're going to be checking in with them. Part of the budget here is cluster coordinators who are doing site visits of the businesses or where they're going to be working, and they're going to be checking in weekly online through our portal. So the requirement is 20 hours per week per student. That could be 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. It could be 2 full days and a half day.
So it's all on-site or it's not on-site?
It's all on site.
It's all on-site. So do they sign in there, or is there
Yeah,
some
we're going to
attendance
they're going to have
check
attendance records that they're going to have to fill out.
that the site coordinator?
And then the site coordinator will certify those.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then what's the disbursement process for the $300 stipends?
So that's actually, we're excited about that. We have a partnership with the Educational Financial Systems Federal Credit Union. I think I get their name right. They're going to sign, they've offered to open accounts to anyone who doesn't have them, and then we're going to do direct deposit, highly encourage direct deposit for all students. We will also offer checks and/or check cards. We're working on that to the ones that don't sign up for a bank account, but we're going to encourage that in the training, that they're the in-person training, and they'll be able to fill out those forms. Some already have, and turn them into their college and career counselor at the schools, and we're collecting those. So it'll be a transfer that we do through the credit union and some actual paper checks that are sent and mailed out, because we collect all the students' information when they log in.
Is that, it sounded like that was a, I don't know, not an incentive, a preference. Are you going after kids that are unbanked?
Well,
in any way?
we are. We thought that financial literacy is an important component of the program. Your first job, that's when you break bad habits. We don't want them going to check cashing and.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you select and screen if you do employers?
So we have a employment agreement, a host agreement that all the folks have to fill out, and then we're doing in the process now of doing site visits, some telephonically, some in person, just to verify that these are actual companies and actual people, and so that's the process. At this point, frankly, we need more hosts, so we're recruiting, but then as long as they agree to our host agreement and they go through our checklist of questions that we ask during the site visit, we're accepting them.
And you're looking for more hosts. And in short, what do they have to put in?
So mostly at this point, just slots. If you guys give us the money, then we just get slots. But we have been asking, if you're a big company like Kaiser Permanente and who's given us $10,000, for example, of that 50, they're taking 8 students, which would only cost whatever 8 times 3, $2,400, but they're making a $10,000 donation to WorkSource Montgomery for the purposes of the program, which will support other students that can participate. So we ask first to sign up for slots, as many as you can, and then secondarily, if you're able to, make a donation. Some of our smaller nonprofits, like we have a partnership with the Wider Circle, who's providing clothing for students that don't have it, and they're going to take students. We're not going to then ask them to make a donation because they're already
making an
donating,
in-kind donation.
Right.
And then so they fill out this questionnaire on the front end or through
the portal.
Interview, portal or over the phone.
Or interview.
And then how will you verify that the students are getting the professional training that is as advertised?
Right.
If I'm a business owner and I want 20 students and I sign up and the county's paying them, but maybe I want them to landscape my property instead or something, how are you going to verify against that?
So a couple checks and balances. Obviously, no policy prevents from bad actors completely, but one, they have to sign the host agreement. So we've got a legal document with the business saying these are the objectives of the program that, and we have 4 objectives that the students learn about the industry in which they're being placed, that they learn about the role of technology, professionalism, and customer service in that industry. So there's 4 objectives that should run across all experiences. And then we will also ask the host and the student in their weekly reflections and in the end of program survey, how did they meet those objectives? So we'll collect that data from both sides, the host and the student. And then the site visit is another check. We ask them to, when they enter their opportunities, so you understand, they have to register, then they enter in, describe what the 3-week opportunity sounds like. What are you going to do with the student? And we provide examples. WorkSource is going to host students, so we say, here's what week 1 could look like. So we give them that guidance, and then we make them write out a narrative form of what they're going to do with the students. So they have to put some forethought in it. I think it was a check and balance, but it's also hurt our ability of getting people to sign up on time because they're, they have to think about what they're going to do with the students. So now we're just taking it over the phone. Hey, just tell us and we'll type it in. So those are some of the safeguards, I think, to ensure that it's not just, cut my grass.
Right. That's all helpful. Thank you. Could you share afterwards some of the host agreements that you
Sure.
have, just so we have some examples?
Yeah, sure.
And maybe the application, because that's not online, so we can't look at it.
Of course. Yeah,
All right.
of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rucker. Ms. Navarro.
Thank you so much. Very excited about this program. So in this particular handout, so what I'm reading here is that the funding gap was of $235,000, so between the executive and with this proposal that Councilmember Rice has put forth, that takes care of that gap?
So
Or was that after?
The 250 does not include the 100 from the county executive because we don't have it yet. It wasn't approved. And so the 235 is the total gap. The
Right, but
100
it would be alleviated if we
by the
voted for the 250 that we're about to
Correct.
adopt,
Correct.
if that goes well. Got it. And then here, as you had described, so you're projecting that perhaps you can place 750 students, but what you're saying is that, you're still trying to recruit
Right.
the hosts.
Right.
But I can, undoubtedly, I'm sure that, we have such vibrant community. I'm sure that you'll be able to meet that target. So, of course, I'm definitely going to support this. I would really, obviously, next year, once you have a little bit of data,
Yeah.
would be very interested in understanding. Sometimes I do worry a little bit about students that may not have access to a computer at home or something to that effect. So, just understanding maybe some of the barriers
Yep.
and really, really trying to ensure, as we always have these conversations, especially those students who perhaps sometimes are not engaged that much or not, maybe don't even, know that they have access to something like this. The ones that we're trying to recruit mostly, if you have any lessons learned,
Yep.
if there needs to be some additional focus or strategic, focus on how do we get to, those students who sometimes are just so disenfranchised or disaffected that don't even think that they should participate. Because I think we really want to get to those students. And lastly, I'm going to be hosting one, so I'm really excited about that.
Thank you.
We'll see how it goes, but really appreciate the work, and and I like the fact that you're leveraging private funds. This is really important. This is the model that we're trying to achieve, and I really look forward to expanding this and broadening a bit more, especially as we've had conversations, as we adopt all these master plans, and we have all these biotech, life science opportunities, really great to start to set an infrastructure so that our students can take advantage of internships in those kinds of places and hopefully then be able to, pursue some of those jobs as well. So the access piece is really, really exciting. But thank you so much.
No, thank you. I can say, you didn't ask, but most of the slots are going to schools that are in impacted areas, either East County or the Down County Consortium. And so, I think Springbrook had over 100 students apply.
That's awesome.
For example, so.
That's great, thanks.
Ms. Florine.
Thanks. Well, basically, we're having a committee meeting right now. And so I think some of us have just wanted to understand the real, following up on someone's question earlier about how many slots you really think you have available. One of the challenges, we've had interns in my office, and the worst thing that can happen is that the young person does not have, a genuine opportunity. My son had a much sought after internship on Capitol Hill, and his job turned out to be, I think he was supposed to contribute to the management of the inter-office softball tournament as an intern with a member of Congress. That wasn't his idea of what he was going to learn. So that was a useful lesson. So the question is, how many, of these slots, given the fact that this is the first time ever and you just started, we really want to help you, and we're all, I think, excited about this. But, we have some other things in our minds, and so the question is, how many really are you very confident that you can fill? That's the question. And I think I might have missed your earlier answer.
Do you want me to answer? Ellie's got a preamble, and then I'll.
Okay. So We've been working really hard. This is not a jobs program, but really an experiential program. We really are making that connection to what's happening in the classroom, to what's happening in the world of work. And that's one of the reasons why there's a big draw, both from our employers as well as from the kids. Because it's not that they're trying to find them a job, like your son was involved with, but to share what the experiences are in the workplace. That's the reason why I'm pretty confident, I'm very confident that we're going to have several additional businesses come along. We've had so many people made verbal commitments to us. Our challenge has been, and this is one of our lessons learned, is that there was an added step to go to our portal and sign in. We've made a commitment. We had a staff meeting just yesterday, and all hands on deck between now and this programs and our staff are committing all of our hours just to reach out to these companies, fill in that portal on our own, and I feel very strongly that we'll be able to get to that 750 number.
So you really do think that you will have, you can meet the 750 number? That's the number that Craig's proposal would.
I do.
would help
I
with.
think it's going to be what this last second. You know, you have people RSVP for a party. They do it the night before. It's the same thing here. We're gonna be getting that end of the line, and that's part of the ramp up of a program. Is that you wait. People don't step up to do it into the end. But I can tell you, we've had so many verbal commitments. It's just a matter of us doing that follow up. And we're committed to doing it.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add, you know, whether we have 200 or 1,000, it's going to be the largest we've ever had in the county, and it's a great start. I understand your point about resources and wanting to manage them properly, and which is a very sound point. But know that if there is any excess, we're going to be putting it right in to have more students next year. So you can rest assured on that.
We expect that of everyone who comes to ask us for money.
This has already launched great conversations with the school system as far as looking at the Edison Center and programs beyond that. I did a presentation last week, and they are very much on board with this. This is not only does this support what we're doing for our kids for the summer, but there's already activity going on that's going to be year-round for this program.
Mr. Elrich?
I think this is a great idea, and it would be good to get the scale, and we've talked about getting programs to scale. This is about as close as we've come. My only question is, what are the budget implications for the stuff we're dealing with right now? I mean, is this going to take things
So I have
off
conferred
the
with
list?
our staff with respect to this matter, and Mr. Smith, you correct me if I state this wrong. The county executive has proposed this coming out of undesignated reserves. Reserves that he's proposed moving from 8.4 to 8.9 in terms of the budget. Mr. Rice is tapping into that undesignated reserves to fund this, okay?
So
From
no
my
implications for
There's
the
no
rest of the funding?
implication from my perspective with respect to the reconciliation list, because it is not, well, I'm sorry.
Wait, there either is or there isn't. It's either this money is aside for the reconciliation list and it's reduced, or it's not. It's not both things.
Actually, this is about the size of the reserve.
Yeah.
This is about the size of
But
the
is
reserve.
that part of our carryover that we're assuming for next year?
It'll be 8.89.
Oh, this is a math problem, guys.
It'll
We
be
can do this.
8.89 instead of 8.9, okay? In the reserve. Now, you can choose in reconciliation to fund that reserve number if you believe, and if you believe our council needs to attend to, 8.89 or 8.9. But that's what we're talking about. We are talking about a fraction of a fraction that the county executive proposed in his budget to tap for this purpose in his supplemental appropriation.
Could I ask Mr. Smith if he would like to opine on this?
The council president is correct. You've started fiscal 18.
No, I want to hear
you've started fiscal
explanation.
18 budget at this time.
Right.
With an expectation of a funding level for the reserves. If you pull money from the undesignated reserves in fiscal 17, that number obviously will go down for the start of fiscal 18. That is true. It's a matter of where you're pulling the funding from. And in terms of the reconciliation list, the answer is correct also that this doesn't necessarily deal with the reconciliation list because that's a fiscal 18 question. However, if you were to fund all of the reconciliation list just as an option, the money would have to come from somewhere, and some of that may come from undesignated reserves as well. So I think that's where some council members see this as a connection to the reconciliation list.
So
With
if
the
I
great-
could,
with the
if I
greatest
could
res- yeah.
paraphrase this then. So what you're saying is that if we're to touch the undesignated reserves in order to fund what's on our reconciliation list, then this is one more piece that is going to come out of the undesignated reserves, or if we are at a limit of what we think we can take, it's something that will prevent something else from being funded out of undesignated reserves. But we could fund it all, or we could fund, which we're not going to do.
It's all the same money. It's all the same. You add money to supplemental appropriation now, less carryover to 18. It all competes. Every dollar.
Well, it was kind of portrayed like it had no effect on next year, on what we're doing, and it does. Well, it does if it, unless you assume we're going to fund everything. Right. Okay, I just want to be clear of that.
Mr. Katz.
Thank you. And that was partially my question. First off, I applaud the program. Candidly, you're going to save lives and change lives, and that's what we should be doing up here and in Montgomery County, and I applaud what you're doing. But I do think it gets confusing for what was going to be on the reconciliation list. This is this year's money. It's not next year's money, next fiscal year's money. But obviously, if you spend this year's money, you're not going to have it for next year. So it doesn't come off the reconciliation list. But the question becomes, Glenn, how much were we adding to the reserves for this year, for next year?
Sorry, that's a Steve Farber question. I just don't know. All I'm saying is that on Wednesday when you meet, you're going to get a report from Steve saying, here's how much money you will have spent, and here's how much money you can carry over. And if you go higher, obviously there's less money that's carried over. And then it doesn't affect the reconciliation list, because you're right, that's FY18, but it affects how much money you have available to fund the reconciliation list.
That's where the confusion
So
is.
that's what I'm saying. It's all the same thing.
Right. Well, I'm fine with this, but anyhow, that is the math issue that we're dealing with.
Mr. Reamer?
Yeah.
Mr. Reamer.
Well, I heard in the council president's comments a particular literal interpretation of what we have before us, which is that the county executive has recommended reducing the undesignated reserves below effectively 8.9 to 8.885. And that's one way to describe the situation. Another, but it doesn't change the simple fact. Well, it does change the simple. If that's how you follow through on it, then it does not affect the resources that are available for the reconciliation list. Otherwise, it does reduce the revenues that are available for the reconciliation list.
Mr. Rice?
So I just wanted to thank my colleagues for this very robust conversation. Again, I think that I'm not trying to be funny. I'm actually serious. I mean, I think that it's good for us to really understand what it is that's going on and how we are looking to make sure that we're taking the right steps in order to start off a program that's going to have some tremendous impacts on a lot of people in our community, especially our young people, a lot of them young people of color who we've talked about for a very long time are kind of shut out of the job experience piece. And I think one of the things that you said, Mr. Jawando, that is incredibly important, or it might have been Dr. Giles who said it, but it's one of those where, yes, we understand this isn't a jobs program, but it's a pathway to jobs. And I think that that's very important, because getting that initial job experience to then have somebody say that, yes, this person worked for me, even if it was only for 3 weeks, and getting the person experience in being able to work for someone and being paid for it, not an unpaid internship, but getting some money for it, actually then can jumpstart them into getting down some of these career pathways. And I think that's a really important piece of this, that needs to be highlighted. So I really wanted to just say thank you to both of you for your commitment, but also thank you to the myriad of companies who have signed on in this initial year, knowing that this is not going to be easy. This is a brand new program, and having faith and trust in Montgomery County and MCPS that we're going to provide them with a robust program, I think is a great start. And so I just really want to thank my colleagues for their consideration.
I think the matter has been submitted to us. There's a motion on the table, I believe. Was there a motion? And was seconded? So long ago that I forgot. Okay, now that we've had the robust conversation, all in favor of the motion that's been presented to us, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Congratulations, Mr. Rice. That then puts us on, I think, do we need a separate vote with respect to the supplemental itself at that point, as amended? I turn to my clerks and ask for guidance. Okay. Move approval, it's been seconded, and now, all in favor, raise your hand again. There you go, now we're done. No, we're not done. We're not done. We're just done with that piece. Okay, and now
We
we
wanted
will
just to
go-
thank you all for everything and your support, and we are really excited about sharing all of the successes at the end of the summer.
So now we move to item number 11. This is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY17 operating budget, Department of Transportation, and Department of General Services for snow removal, wind, and rainstorm cleanup. Action will be scheduled immediately following this hearing. Dr. Orland, what do you got for us?
This is the snow and storm supplemental. It's actually the smallest one we've had in 5 years and the third smallest we've had in the last 17 years because it didn't snow much. The total amount of money that's been spent so far in this fiscal year through the end of April was about $10.7 million. The budget was between what is in DOT's budget and in the non-departmental account is about $9.2 million. So the difference is about 1.4. Now, the executive every year at this point also recommends adding to that because we still have May and June. And oftentimes there have been big storms in May and June. In the past several years, he's asked for an additional $1,050,000 to cover those kinds of exigencies. This year, it's a little bit less than $1 million. So that's what brings the total supplemental up to $2.4 million. Given this last discussion, this is coming off the top of my head, but I'm going to suggest this if you want to roll the dice. If you just added $150,000 that wasn't in the macro, if you decided you wanted to roll the dice and say, all right, we're not going to set aside $1 million the last 2 months, but $850,000, you'd break even.
All in favor of staff's recommendation? Oh, do we?
It's a roll of the dice. I mean,
Understood. We
obviously,
can
if the storms come, we're going to have to make the payments.
Ms. Florine has moved staff's recommendation. Is there a second to the staff's, and Mr. Katz has seconded, which is,
Just to understand, are we gambling that there will not be any more snow in fiscal 17?
Storms.
Mhm.
Windstorms, tornadoes. We've had some. in the
we're not
spring.
gambling completely, we're just reducing the total amount by $150,000. All in favor of the amended supplemental, please raise your hand. That is unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Owen. We now have item 12. This is a public hearing on a resolution to approve a police mutual aid agreement between Montgomery County and the City of Gaithersburg, authorizing on-duty Gaithersburg police officers to enforce Maryland vehicle law outside the city limits for serious traffic offenses. Action will be scheduled immediately following this hearing. Do we have any witnesses testifying on this matter? None. Ms. Myhill, do you have anything to say to us with respect to this?
No, not really. These are fairly standard. Each of them are a little bit different, but you've approved several mutual aid agreements in the past. The difference is a lot of police departments have MOUs with one another, but an MOU under state law is not a municipality or a jurisdiction can't enforce the state traffic laws outside of its jurisdiction, so that's why MOUs need to be upgraded to mutual aid agreements.
Is there objection? Is there objection to this item?
You need a
We need-
motion.
And Mr. Katz moves it, and Mr. Rice seconds it, and all in favor of it, please raise. All in favor of, please, let's raise our hands and be done for the afternoon. Mr. Rocker. We are done for the afternoon. There is no public hearing this evening. There was one previously scheduled. There is no public hearing this evening. That will be done in June. There are no deferred items. I beg your pardon. No. I apologize. I don't know what we're referring, okay.
Could I go back and I just have a clarification? And it was my fault, I didn't mention this. The 850,000 that's overage, there's really two different supplementals here. There's one for DOT and one for DGS. And so I propose that the 150,000 reduction come out of DOT's share of the remaining. So DGS is the same. So if you're okay with that.
That was my motion.
I thought it was.
I'm not aware of any deferred items
Okay.
at this moment. I apologize. Mr. Hucker, if you have an item to raise, please do so.
It's been, yeah, it was my understanding it should come up now. It was distributed to everyone's offices, but this is an issue I think many of you know something about. The redevelopment of the Studio Plaza project in downtown Silver Spring has been really disruptive, and it's out of the 14 construction projects going in downtown Silver Spring right now, it's the only one that has caused significant disruption, and yet it's the one that the county has special responsibility for because it's the redevelopment of a surface county parking lot to a big multifamily dwelling with underground parking. It's disrupted about at least 200 small businesses that have been affected by the loss of the surface parking and then the disruption of the traffic flow and the metered parking in the adjacent streets. Mr. Elrich and I have attended meetings that the Urban District sponsored to address the concerns of those small businesses. There was, I think, another proposal coming from the businesses that the county should reimburse them for their lost business. And obviously, people raised concerns about that, both for the cost and the precedent it would set. So this proposal coming from the Business Association in that area that the county has funded in the past is simply to add $15,000 to the rec list for marketing of the small businesses through the Urban District, with the grantee being Fenton Village, which is the Small Business Association in that area. And this is a serious thing. Just yesterday, I got a call from the owner of Fire Station 1, who didn't know anything about this, but he says the restaurant is unable to pay their rent to him because they've lost so much business. I mean, many of these businesses have lost tens of thousands of dollars over a project that the county started in that area. So I think this is a very modest effort to compensate them.
The motion is to add $15,000 to the reconciliation list under what, DHCA?
I think, yes.
It was the
Urban District?
Urban District, Silver Spring Urban District, that's right.
I'll
Original.
second your motion.
Thank you.
Is there any objection to the motion?
Great. Thank you all.
Now we are done. Thank you.